Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Luther Grimwald, and I need to tell you what I found up on Devil's Backbone Ridge. I've been a park ranger for 23 years, seen more missing person cases than I care to count, but nothing like this. Nothing that made me question my own mind. The frostbite on my hands should have been my first clue something was wrong. When I woke up in my camp that morning, my fingers were black at the tips. 3 days of unconsciousness in February weather should have killed me. But there I was, alive and breathing in the cranberry wilderness, 45 miles from the nearest road. My camp was destroyed, tent shredded like something had used claws on it. My radio, the backup radio I always carry, smashed to pieces and scattered in the snow. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the journal lying open next to my sleeping bag. It was my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing those words. Asterisk, Day 7. Luther Grimwald will die at sunset. The bone, the harvest is complete, he served his purpose well. Asterisk, I picked up that journal with shaking hands, page after page of my own writing, describing my death in detail. How my bones would crack, how the marrow would taste, how my screams would echo through the cave systems until they became just another sound the mountain made. The blood trail started right outside my destroyed camp. Not animal blood. I know animal blood. This was human, and there was too much of it. The trail led up the ridge toward the limestone caves, through snowdrifts 8 feet deep. I should have turned back. Should have tried to get help somehow. But I've never left missing people unfound. Not once in 23 years. The blood trail ended at a cave mouth I'd never seen before, though I'd hiked these mountains since I was a boy. Inside, the temperature dropped so fast, my breath turned to ice crystals before it left my mouth. 12 skeletons sat in a perfect circle. They were still wearing their clothes, hiking boots, winter coats, backpacks. Still holding their personal things, wedding rings on finger bones. A woman's skeleton clutched a photograph of 2 children. A man's bones held a GPS device, the screen still glowing somehow. Each skull had been cracked open like an egg. Clean breaks, surgical precision. The long bones of their arms and legs were hollow. Someone had extracted every drop of bone marrow with the patience of a surgeon. I knew these people. I had their missing person reports in my files. The hiking group that disappeared 3 weeks ago. Sarah Martinez, the park volunteer who'd gone out to check trail markers. The college kids from Charleston who never made it home for winter break. But how did I know their faces? The skulls were just bone, empty sockets where eyes used to be. Yet I could see their faces clearly. Remember their last words. Remember the sound they made when. That's when I realized I was still holding the journal. My handwriting was filling in new words as I watched. Asterisk. Luther remembers now. Luther was there for every death. Luther was hunting with me. Asterisk. The pen wasn't in my hand, but the words kept coming. Asterisk. Luther, look at your reflection in the ice. Asterisk. I looked down at the frozen puddle at my feet. The face looking back wasn't mine anymore. It was longer, thinner. The teeth were too sharp. The eyes were yellow like old bone. And I was so hungry for marrow. The day before I found the skeletons, I knew something was hunting me. I'd been tracking the missing hiking group for 6 days, following their trail deeper into the wilderness. Good weather for tracking, fresh snow every night to show new sign. But by the 6th day, I realized the tracks were wrong. I was making circles, the same boot print, over and over. My own boot print. According to my GPS, I'd walked the exact same trail 5 times. Same route, same timing, same rest stops. But I couldn't remember walking it before. Each time felt like the first time. I found supply caches I didn't remember making, canned food buried under marked trees, emergency blankets stashed in rock crevices. Each cache marked with symbols carved into the bark, symbols that looked like they'd been carved with fingernails and stained with something dark. The symbols were written in my blood. I know my own blood. I've bled enough on these mountains. Cut myself on rocks, scraped up from falls, nicked by my own knife. This was definitely my blood, but I had no cuts on my hands. The temperature started dropping as the sun went down. Not normal cold. This was wrong cold. The kind that makes your bones ache before your skin even feels it. 40 degrees in 5 minutes. My breath was freezing before it left my mouth. That's when I heard the voices. "Help me, Luther." Sarah Martinez. I knew her voice from the ranger station. Sweet girl, always volunteered for the hard assignments. But Sarah had been missing for 2 weeks. "Please, Luther, I'm so cold." The voice came from 3 different directions at once, north, south, and directly above me. I spun around, rifle ready, but saw nothing but trees and snow. "Luther, why didn't you save us?" That was Jake Morrison, one of the college kids. His voice was older than it should be, like he'd aged years in the 2 weeks he'd been missing. "We trusted you, Luther." Multiple voices now, all 12 of the missing people, speaking at once, but somehow I could hear each voice clearly. They were angry, hurt, disappointed in me. I started running. The voices followed me through the trees, staying just out of sight. Sometimes I'd catch a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. A winter coat behind a tree trunk, a hiking boot disappearing behind a rock. But when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. I ran for 3 hours straight. Impossible in this terrain, in this snow, but my legs never got tired. My lungs never burned. I wasn't even breathing hard. That should have been my second clue. The voices stopped when I reached my camp, but the temperature kept dropping. Ice formed on my eyelashes. My rifle action froze solid. The metal of my belt buckle cracked from the cold. I managed to get a fire going, but the flames burned blue and gave no heat. The wood turned to ash without ever being consumed. The light from the fire cast shadows that moved independently, reaching toward me with long, thin fingers. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. 12 feet tall, standing just outside my fire's light. Antlers like a crown, stretching 6 feet across, arms too long for its body, fingers that ended in points sharp enough to carve bone. It was wearing my face, not my whole face, just pieces of it. My eyes, but yellow, my mouth, but with too many teeth. My nose, but flattened like something had broken it repeatedly. It spoke with all 12 voices at once. Luther knows the game now. Luther is learning to hunt properly. I tried to shoot it, pulled the trigger 6 times, but my rifle was firing ice bullets that shattered against its chest like snowballs. It laughed with my wife's voice. The day I watched it feed, I learned what true horror looks like. I'd been following the blood trail since dawn, thinking I was closing in on survivors. The trail was fresh, warm blood melting through the snow, still steaming in the cold air. Someone was alive and hurt and needed help. I found Sarah Martinez in a clearing, tied to a tree with what looked like her own climbing rope. She was conscious, talking, begging me to help her. "Luther, thank God. It's been hunting me for days. Please, cut me loose." Her voice was normal. Human, scared but hopeful. She looked exactly like she should. 24 years old, dark hair, brown eyes, wearing the same park volunteer uniform she'd had on when she went missing. But she was floating 3 feet off the ground. The rope wasn't holding her to the tree. She was suspended in empty air, arms spread wide, like she was being held by invisible hands. "Luther, why aren't you helping me?" That's when I saw the creature behind her. Not hiding, just invisible until it wanted to be seen. 12 feet tall, antlers scraping the tree branches above. It was holding her up with one hand. Its fingers were so long they wrapped around her entire torso like a cage. "Watch, Luther. Learn how the feeding works." Its voice was different every time it spoke. Sometimes old, sometimes young, sometimes male, sometimes female, but always hungry. It started with her left arm. Didn't break the bone, somehow pulled the marrow out through her skin. I could see it happening, like watching someone drink a thick milkshake through a straw. The marrow flowed up through her arm, through her shoulder, into the creature's mouth. Sarah stayed conscious the whole time. "It doesn't hurt, Luther," she said, but her voice was wrong now. Too calm, too accepting. "It feels good, like the best sleep you've ever had." Her arm went white as paper when the marrow was gone. Not dead white, empty white, like looking at a piece of paper with nothing written on it. Then it started on her right arm, then her legs, then her ribs. The process took 4 hours. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Every time I tried to raise my rifle, my arms wouldn't obey. Every time I tried to run, my legs stayed planted. Luther is learning, the creature said with Sarah's voice, even though Sarah was still talking with her own mouth. Luther understands the patience required. When it finished, Sarah thanked it for the feeding, told it how good it felt to be empty, to have all that heavy marrow removed from her bones. Then the creature let her go, and she collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. But she was still alive, still conscious, still talking. Your turn next, Luther, she said, smiling with a skull face. It's wonderful, you'll see. The creature grew while I watched, fed on Sarah's marrow and gained size, gained mass. Its antlers spread wider, its reach extended, its hunger deepened. When it looked at me, I saw my reflection in its yellow eyes. But the reflection was wrong. I looked eager, excited. I looked hungry. I started changing on the 4th day. The creature had been in my head since I arrived, but that morning was the first time I experienced its memories directly. I woke up remembering hunts I'd never been on, victims I'd never killed. I remembered being a Seneca shaman named Wendigo 300 years ago. I remembered the winter that lasted 2 years, when the snow never melted and the game never returned. I remembered eating my own children to survive. I remembered the first taste of human bone marrow and how nothing else ever satisfied the hunger again. But those weren't my memories. I'm Luther Grimwald. I'm from Pittsburgh. I've been a park ranger for 23 years. My wife died in a hiking accident 5 years ago, and I moved to the backcountry stations to get away from people. Except I was also remembering my wife's death differently now. I remembered hunting her through these same mountains. I remembered the patience it took, driving her off the main trail with carefully placed false markers. I remembered how she called my name as I stalked her, how she trusted me right up until the moment I cracked open her skull. I remembered how sweet her marrow tasted. No, I said out loud, standing in my camp. That's not what happened. Helen fell. She slipped on wet rocks. But I was walking while I talked, following a trail I didn't remember making, following it toward the limestone caves where something was waiting for me. The creature was sitting by an underground stream, washing bones in the dark water. 12 sets of bones, perfectly clean, arranged by size. Luther remembers correctly now, it said with Helen's voice. Luther was always my partner. It showed me more memories. 5 years of hunting together. 47 victims, all missing persons cases I'd been assigned to investigate. All people I'd led into the wilderness and fed to the hunger. Luther chose this life, it continued. Luther was tired of saving people, tired of helping, tired of human weakness. I wanted to deny it, wanted to fight, but the memories were so clear, so detailed. I could remember the weight of Helen's body as I carried her to the feeding place. I could remember the sound her bones made when I cracked them open. I could remember how right it felt. Luther, look at your hands. My fingernails had grown longer, sharper, dark stains under them that looked like dried blood. Luther, look at your teeth. I ran my tongue over my teeth. They were pointed now, made for tearing meat, for cracking bone. Luther, look at your reflection. I looked down at the dark stream water. My face was longer, thinner. My eyes were yellow. My skin was white, like old bone. But I still looked like me, still looked human enough to fool other humans. Luther understands now, the creature said. Luther is ready for the final offer. It stood up, 12 feet tall in the cave. Its antlers scraped the ceiling. Its breath came out as ice crystals. Join willingly, Luther. Become my permanent partner. Help me hunt the real criminals, the murderers, the rapists, the child killers. Let me feed on evil instead of innocence. The offer sounded reasonable, logical. Justice served with efficiency. Or resist, and I take your body anyway. But if you resist, I hunt anyone I choose. Families, children, innocents. I looked at my hands again. The nails were even longer now, curved like claws. I was so hungry. What do you need me to do? On my first day in the mountains, I was Bly, still human. I remembered driving up the Forest Service road, confident and prepared. 23 years of experience handling missing person cases. The hiking group had been missing for only 2 days, plenty of time to find them alive if I moved fast. The radio was working then. I checked in with headquarters, confirmed my position, gave them my planned search route. Standard procedure, everything by the book. The forest was quiet when I reached the trailhead. Too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muted. But that happens sometimes in winter. Animals hunker down during cold snaps. The missing group's campsite was easy to find. They'd followed trail markers exactly, set up in the designated camping area, practiced good wilderness etiquette. Their fire ring was properly constructed, food properly stored, waste properly disposed of. But they'd left in a hurry. Tent stakes pulled up fast, leaving gear behind. Sleeping bags scattered, one, backpack split open, contents spilled across the ground. Boot prints heading in 6 different directions. Something had spooked them badly. I found the first body that afternoon. It was arranged like a scarecrow against a dead tree, arms outstretched, head tilted at an odd angle. Still wearing full winter gear. Coat, hat, gloves. From a distance, it looked like someone resting. Up close, I could see the skull was cracked open like an egg. That's when my radio stopped working. Not broken, just silent. No static, no signal, nothing. Like someone had turned off the entire radio network. The temperature started dropping as the sun went down. Not normal cold, wrong cold. The kind that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. I should have tried to hike out then. Should have abandoned the search and gone for help. But I had 11 more people to find, and I've never left missing people unfound. I made camp a quarter mile from the body, set up my emergency shelter, started a fire. The flames burned normal then, orange and yellow, giving real heat. The wood crackled and popped like it should. That night, I dreamed about my wife Helen. She was standing at the foot of my sleeping bag, wearing the same clothes she'd died in. Her skull was cracked open like the scarecrow's. "Luther," she said, "you need to understand what you really are." I woke up screaming, but the scream that came out of my mouth wasn't my voice. It was deeper, older, hungry. And I was so cold I could see ice crystals forming on my skin. The fire had burned down to blue embers that gave no heat. My rifle action was frozen solid. The metal of my belt buckle had cracked from the cold. Something was watching me from the tree line. I could feel its attention, like weight pressing down on my chest. "Luther," it called with Helen's voice. "Luther, come and see what you really are." I grabbed my flashlight and followed the voice into the trees. The creature was waiting for me in a clearing, 12 feet tall, antlers like a crown. It was wearing my face, not perfectly, but close enough to fool someone who didn't know me well. "Hello, Luther," it said with my own voice. "I've been waiting for you to remember." "Remember what?" "That you've been dead for 6 days." It showed me my own body then, arranged with the others in the circle of skeletons. My skull cracked open, my bones hollowed out, my marrow consumed. "You died on the first day, Luther. Everything since then has been me experiencing your memories, learning how to be you." The thing wearing my face smiled with too many teeth. "But the memories were so interesting. I decided to let you experience the hunt from the other side. Let you feel what it's like to be prey instead of predator." I looked down at my hands. They were becoming transparent, fading like fog in sunlight. "The experience is over now, Luther. Thank you for the entertainment." I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I was becoming nothing, returning to the death I'd experienced a week ago. The last thing I saw was the creature putting on my ranger uniform, practicing my walk, my voice, my mannerisms. It was ready to report back to headquarters now. Ready to be the perfect Luther Grimwald. Ready to lead more people into the mountains for the harvest. My consciousness faded to a whisper, trapped forever in the thing's memory, watching helplessly as it wore my face and spoke with my voice. But sometimes, late at night when the creature feeds, I can feel it thinking about my memories of Helen, how she tasted, how she screamed. And I remember now, Helen wasn't my first victim. She was my first partner. The real Luther Grimwald has been dead for decades. The thing wearing my face has been hunting in these mountains far longer than anyone knows. And it's getting so much better at pretending to be human. Asterisk authors. Note, this story is based on Wendigo folklore of the Seneca and other Native American tribes, retold with respect for the cultural origins of these important spiritual beliefs. Asterisk. My name is Franklin Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Fletch. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, wild boar, lost hikers who thought flip-flops were proper hiking gear, you name it. But what happened last summer in Pisgah National Forest changed everything I believed about what's possible in this world. I'm 39, old enough to know better than to go chasing ghost stories, but young enough to still do it anyway. Maybe it's because I spent 4 years as a Marine sniper before this job. Or maybe it's the anthropology degree gathering dust in my closet, but I've always been drawn to the weird stuff. The things that don't make sense in the official reports. The Cherokee used to live all through these mountains, and they had stories. Dark stories about things that weren't quite human, things that could wear a person's face better than the person themselves. They called them Raven, mockers, witches who stole life by becoming someone else entirely. Growing up here, I heard those stories around campfires, but like most folks, I figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering off alone. I should have listened better. It was August 1986 when everything started going wrong. North Carolina summers are brutal, thick, humid air that hangs on you like wet wool, and vegetation so dense you could hide a house 20 feet from the trail and no one would spot it. Perfect weather for things that don't want to be found. I was stationed at the Looking Glass Falls Research Outpost, about 30 miles from the nearest backup. Officially, I was there to monitor wildlife patterns and track the movement of black bear populations. Unofficially, I was investigating reports that didn't fit any normal pattern I'd ever seen. My partner was Jake Morrison, a good man who'd been ranging these mountains for almost as long as I had. Jake was Vietnam, like a lot of us, from that generation. Took some shrapnel in his back during the Tet Offensive, which left him with a permanent limp and the habit of favoring his left side when he stood. He had kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, but he carried sadness too. His daughter Sarah had died in a car wreck back in '78, and he never quite got over it. The thing is, when you spend months alone with someone in the wilderness, you learn their habits, how they take their coffee, which side they sleep on, the way they hum off-key when they're nervous. You know these things the way you know your own heartbeat. So when Jake started acting different, I noticed. It began small. He stopped humming. Started standing straighter, which should have been good news for his back, but it wasn't. And when Mrs. Henderson came by the station looking for her missing husband, Jake listened to her story with the kind of detached interest you'd show a weather report. That wasn't the Jake Morrison I knew. The real Jake would have had a search party organized before she finished talking. "You feeling all right, partner?" I asked him that evening as we sat around our camp stove. He looked at me with those same kind eyes, but something was off, like looking at a photograph of someone instead of the actual person. "Fine as frog's hair," he said, using one of his favorite expressions. But his voice was too level, too controlled. The real Jake had a slight rasp from years of cigarettes. I told myself I was being paranoid. We'd been isolated too long, seeing patterns where there weren't any. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the tree line. Every time I looked, though, there was nothing there but shadows and leaves. I should have trusted my instincts. In the military, we called it situational awareness, the ability to sense when something's wrong, even when your rational mind can't explain why. It's kept me alive more times than I can count. But I wanted to believe everything was normal. I needed it to be normal. The next morning, we got a call about another missing person. A hiker named Tom Peterson had vanished from the Skinwalker Ridge Trail. His wife Sarah had last seen him the evening before, heading out for what should have been a quick sunset hike. "We'll find him," Jake told me as we gathered our gear. These mountains don't keep their secrets long. It was something the real Jake might have said, but the way he said it made my skin crawl, like he knew something I didn't. We found Tom Peterson's campsite without much trouble. His tent was still set up properly, sleeping bag laid out neat as you please, but his hiking boots were missing. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. Nobody goes hiking barefoot in these mountains, not unless they want to end up with feet full of thorns and worse. "Tracks lead that way," Jake said, pointing toward a game trail that wound deeper into the forest. "Looks like he headed toward the thermal caves." I knelt down to examine the prints. They were definitely human, but something bothered me about them. The stride was too long, like whoever made them had legs a couple inches longer than Tom Peterson's height would suggest. and they pressed deep into the soft earth, deeper than a man Peterson's size should have made. "These don't look right," I told Jake. He barely glanced at them. "Feet swell when you've been hiking all day. Makes the prints look different." That might have been true, but it didn't explain why the tracks seemed to change as we followed them. Sometimes they looked normal. Other times, they looked like something with claws had made them. The thermal caves were about 2 miles in, a series of limestone caverns that stayed warm year-round thanks to underground hot springs. The Cherokee considered them sacred, a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead grew thin. Park Service kept them off the official maps because we didn't want tourists getting lost in there, but locals knew about them. As we got closer, the forest grew quiet. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, even the ever-present sound of wind through the trees had died away. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. "You notice how quiet it is?" I asked Jake. "Animals probably smelled our approach," he said without looking back at me. "They're just being cautious." But I'd been in these woods long enough to know the difference between cautious wildlife and something that had scared every living thing into hiding. This was the second kind. We found Tom Peterson 20 yards from the cave entrance, or what was left of him. The body was arranged sitting against a tree trunk, arms folded neatly in his lap, head tilted back like he'd just laid down for a nap. From a distance, you might have thought he was resting. Up close, it was clear he'd been dead for hours. But here's what made my blood run cold. He looked dried out, like something had drained all the moisture from his body, leaving skin like old leather and eyes that had sunk deep into his skull. His clothes hung loose on a frame that seemed to have shrunk. "Jesus," I whispered, pulling out my radio to call it in. Jake put his hand on my arm. "Wait." "Wait for what?" "We've got a body here. We need to. Look closer." I didn't want to look closer, but I did. That's when I saw what Jake was talking about. Tom Peterson's wedding ring was missing, but there was no tan line where it should have been. His wallet was still in his pocket, but when I checked it, all the photos of his family were gone. Not stolen gone, like they'd never been there in the first place. "How does someone remove photos from a wallet without taking the wallet itself?" I asked. Jake shrugged. "Maybe he left them at camp. Some people don't like carrying pictures when they hike." I stared at him. The Jake Morrison I knew would never have said something that stupid. Tom Peterson's driver's license was still in the wallet, along with credit cards and $43 in cash. Nobody leaves family photos behind but takes their credit cards on a day hike. "Jake, what the hell is wrong with you?" For just a second, something flickered across his face. Something that wasn't quite human. Then, it was gone, and he was looking at me with concern. "Nothing's wrong with me, partner. You're the one acting strange. Maybe the isolation's getting to you." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone made me back down. Instead, I called in the body and waited for the coroner to arrive. While we waited, I kept watching Jake out of the corner of my eye. He stood too straight. He didn't favor his left side, and when he thought I wasn't looking, he smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. The coroner was a woman named Dr. Ellen Marsh, someone I'd worked with before. She was thorough, professional, and she had the same reaction to Tom Peterson's body that I'd had. "I've never seen anything like this," she said after her initial examination. "It's like he was mummified, but there's no evidence of any mummification process. The body's been drained of fluids, but I can't find any wounds or puncture marks." "Any idea what could cause something like this?" I asked. She shook her head. "I'll know more after the autopsy. But off the record, this doesn't look like any natural death I've ever seen." Jake had wandered away while Dr. Marsh and I talked, claiming he wanted to search the area for more clues. When he came back, he was carrying Tom Peterson's missing hiking boots. "Found these about 50 yards that way," he said, pointing toward the caves. "Looks like he took them off before he died." Dr. Marsh and I exchanged glances. Nobody takes off their boots and then walks 50 yards through mountain underbrush. Your feet would be shredded. "Did you check inside the boots?" Dr. Marsh asked. Jake nodded. "Clean as a whistle. No blood, no torn flesh, nothing to suggest he walked anywhere barefoot." That night, back at the station, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom Peterson's empty eye sockets and Jake's wrong smile. Around 2 in the morning, I got up for a glass of water and found Jake standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" I asked. He turned to look at me, and for just a moment, I could have sworn his eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. "Just thinking about Tom Peterson," he said. "Poor bastard. Wonder what his wife's going through right now." I studied his face in the dim light. "You mean Sarah Peterson?" "That's what I said." "No, you said his wife. Tom Peterson's wife is named Lisa. Sarah Peterson is his daughter." Jake blinked once, slowly. "Of course. Lisa." I misspoke. But the real Jake Morrison would never have made that mistake. He had a daughter named Sarah who died young, and he was careful about names, always had been. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay there wondering who or what I'd been sharing a cabin with for the past 3 weeks. The next morning, Jake was gone. I woke up to find his bed made with military precision, his gear missing, and a note on the kitchen table written in handwriting that looked like his, but felt wrong somehow. It said he'd gotten a call about another missing person and had headed out early to investigate. He'd be back by evening. I tried raising him on the radio, nothing but static. I tried calling the main ranger station to see if they'd sent him anywhere. They hadn't heard from Jake in 2 days. That's when the real fear started creeping in. I spent the morning checking our equipment and trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe Jake was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the isolation had gotten to him worse than I'd thought. People snap sometimes, especially people who've seen combat. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. Around noon, I heard a vehicle approaching. A pickup truck came up the access road, and I felt a moment of relief until I saw who got out. It was Jake, looking perfectly normal, carrying a gas station coffee and wearing that wrong smile. "Sorry about this morning," he called out as he approached the cabin. "Got a call about a missing kid and didn't want to wake you." "False alarm, though. Kid just wandered off to a friend's house." "What call?" I asked. "Our radio's been down all morning. Used my cell phone," he said, holding up a device I'd never seen him carry before. "Since when do you have a cell phone?" "Since last month. Figured it was time to join the modern world." He laughed, but it wasn't Jake's laugh. It was too high, too forced. "Want some coffee?" I brought enough for 2. I accepted the coffee, but I didn't drink it. Something about the way he offered it, like he was particularly interested in watching me take a sip, made me suspicious. "How's the Peterson investigation going?" I asked. "Case closed," he said. "Natural causes, heart attack looks like. Poor guy just picked a bad place to die." Dr. Marsh said it didn't look natural. Dr. Marsh changed her mind after the autopsy. Turns out Peterson had a heart condition nobody knew about. I stared at him. "She completed the autopsy already?" "Yesterday she said it would take at least a week." For just a second, that something not human flickered across his face again. Then he shrugged. "Guess she worked overtime." That evening, I called Dr. Marsh directly. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding tired. "Dr. Marsh, this is Ranger Hawthorne. I was wondering about the Peterson autopsy results." "What autopsy results?" "Tom Peterson. You said you'd have findings after the percent." "Autopsy." Long pause. "Ranger Hawthorne, I haven't started the autopsy yet. The body never arrived at my facility." My blood went cold. "What do you mean it never arrived?" "The transport service was supposed to pick it up yesterday morning, but when they got to the site, the body was gone. I assumed you'd moved it for some reason." I looked across the cabin at Jake, who was pretending to read a magazine. "Dr. Marsh, I need to ask you something, and this is going to sound crazy. When you left the Peterson site yesterday, was Ranger Morrison with you?" "Ranger Morrison? I never met any Ranger Morrison. You were alone when I got there, remember? You said your partner was out searching the area, but I never saw him." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. "Everything all right?" Jake asked without looking up from his magazine. "Fine," I managed. "Just checking on something." But nothing was fine. If Dr. Marsh had never met Jake, then who had been with me at the Peterson site? And more importantly, who was sitting across from me right now? I excused myself to use the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial the number for the main ranger station. "This is Hawthorne at Looking Glass," I whispered when dispatch answered. "I need to speak to Supervisor Williams immediately." "Hold on, Ranger Hawthorne." Williams came on the line 30 seconds later. "Fletch, what's the situation?" "Sir, I need you to confirm something for me." Is Jake Morrison currently assigned to my station? Jake Morrison, Fletch. Morrison's been dead for 3 weeks. Don't you remember? We found his body in those thermal caves near your station. You identified the remains yourself. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. 3 weeks ago, the day Jake had started acting strange, the day he'd stopped humming and started standing too straight. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. Sir, are you absolutely certain Morrison is dead? Positive. We had a memorial service for him last Thursday. You were supposed to attend, but you called in sick. Are you feeling all right, Ranger Hawthorne? I couldn't answer. Through the thin bathroom door, I could hear Jake moving around the cabin, but his footsteps sounded different now. Too light, like he wasn't quite touching the ground. Sir, I think I'm in trouble here. I think something's been impersonating Morrison, and the line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no dial tone. The phone lines had been cut. When I came out of the bathroom, Jake was sitting at the kitchen table, still smiling that wrong smile. But now I could see what I'd missed before. His feet didn't quite touch the floor. His shadow was too dark, too sharp-edged. And when he breathed, his chest didn't rise and fall the way a living person's should. Problem with the phone? He asked in a voice that was almost Jake's, but not quite. Must be the storm, I said, though there was no storm. That's a shame, he said, tilting his head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be human. I was hoping you could call for help. That's when I realized he knew that I knew, and that's when I ran. I bolted for the door, but he was faster than any human had a right to be. His hand slammed against the door frame inches from my head, and when I looked at it, I saw claws instead of fingernails. Now, Fletch, he said in Jake's voice. Where are you going? We have so much to talk about. I ducked under his arm and made it outside, but I could hear him following. Not running something that might have been footsteps, if footsteps could sound like rustling leaves and snapping twigs. I made it to my truck and got the engine started, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, the thing that had been wearing Jake's face was standing in the cabin doorway, smiling and waving, goodbye like we were old friends. That's when I saw it wasn't alone. 3 other figures stood behind it in the shadows of the cabin. I couldn't make out their faces, but I recognized the way they stood. Tom Peterson, Sarah Peterson, who shouldn't have been there at all, and someone else I couldn't identify, all of them waving goodbye with the same wrong smile. I drove like hell toward town, but when I reached the main road, I found it blocked by fallen trees. Fresh cuts, like someone had used a chainsaw, but the cuts were too clean, too precise, and there were tracks in the dirt around the trees. The same impossible tracks I'd found at Tom Peterson's campsite. I was trapped. I abandoned the truck and took to the woods on foot. Growing up in these mountains and 4 years of military training had taught me how to move quietly, how to hide, how to survive. But this was different. This wasn't hide and seek with human trackers. This was being hunted by something that could wear any face it chose. I made it maybe 2 miles before I heard voices calling my name. Jake's voice, coming from 3 different directions at once. Then Tom Peterson's voice, asking for help. Then a woman's voice I didn't recognize, crying that she was lost and scared. But I could see them through the trees. Dark shapes moving wrong, too fluid, like they were made of shadow instead of flesh. Every time I looked directly at one, it would freeze and become perfectly still, but I could feel them watching me with eyes that reflected moonlight. I found an old Cherokee burial cave about halfway up Skinwalker Ridge and crawled inside. The cave was just deep enough for me to hide, but shallow enough that nothing could get behind me. I'd learned that trick in Vietnam, never let the enemy surround you. That's where I waited, and that's where it finally showed me its true face. Hello, Franklin. The voice came from the cave mouth, but it wasn't Jake's voice anymore. It was older, rougher, like wind through dead leaves. When I looked, I saw something that might have been human once, a long time ago. Tall and thin, with skin like old leather and eyes that were completely black. It wore clothes that looked like they'd been stolen from a dozen different people, all the wrong size. You can see me now? It said, sounding pleased. Most people never do. They see what they expect to see, right up until the end. What are you? I asked. I'm what your people call a raven mocker. What the Cherokee called Kieska. I take what I need to survive. You're a shapeshifter. It laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Shapeshifter. Such a limited word. I don't just change my appearance, Franklin. I become them. I take their memories, their mannerisms, their very essence. I become more them than they ever were. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been studying you for 3 weeks, learning how to be Franklin, Hawthorne. Your habits, your fears, your guilt about the people you've killed in war. Did you know you talk in your sleep? Very educational. I thought about all the nights I'd slept in the same cabin with this thing, never knowing what it was. What happened to the real Jake? He served his purpose. He taught me how to be human again. It's been so long since I wore a human face that I'd forgotten some of the details. Jake reminded me. You killed him. I consumed him. There's a difference. Death is final. Consumption is transformation. Jake lives on, in a way. His memories, his experiences, they're all part of me now. In fact, he's here right now, watching through my eyes. The thing stepped closer, and I could smell death on it. Old death, like something that had been rotting for years. Soon, you'll be part of me too. I'll walk out of these mountains wearing your face, speaking with your voice. I'll go to your sister's wedding next month. I'll visit your mother for Christmas. I'll live your life better than you ever could. People will know. They'll figure out something's wrong. Will they? I knew Jake Morrison better than his own mother by the time I was finished with him. I know you just as well now. I know about the nightmares from your time in the service. I know about the girl you left behind in Charlotte. I know about your father's drinking and your mother's quiet disappointment in your life choices. It was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. This thing had been watching me, studying me, learning to be me. How long before I wouldn't know the difference between its memories and mine? There's just one thing I need to understand. It continued. Your guilt. You carry so much of it, but I can't quite grasp why. Help me understand, Franklin. What did you do in the war that haunts you so? I'd never told anyone about Sergeant Miller. About the friendly fire incident that wasn't so friendly. About the split-second decision I'd made when Miller was about to reveal our position to the enemy. I'd carried that secret for 15 years, but something about this creature's black eyes made me want to confess. I killed my commanding officer, I heard myself say. Why? He was going to get us all killed. He was drunk, scared, about to blow our position. So I shot him and made it look like enemy fire. The creature smiled, and I realized I'd just made a terrible mistake. Perfect, it said. That's exactly the kind of guilt that makes a person authentic. Thank you, Franklin. Now I understand you completely. That's when I remembered the old Cherokee stories. Raven mockers fed on more than just flesh and blood. They fed on guilt, on shame, on the dark secrets that people carried. The more tortured the soul, the more satisfying the meal. But the stories also said something else. They had weaknesses. I'd done more research than just folklore. I'd talked to Cherokee elders, learned about their purification rituals. Iron and salt and fire, the old protections that every culture seemed to know instinctively. The thing was still talking, explaining how it would wear my life like a coat, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was reaching slowly into my pack, feeling for the items I'd carried as insurance against the weird cases. Iron railroad spike from an abandoned train line. Rock salt from my emergency kit. Sage I'd bought from a Cherokee woman in Cherokee, North Carolina. You're not paying attention, Franklin, the creature said. That's rude. Actually, I am paying attention, I said, pulling out the iron spike. I'm paying attention to something my grandmother used to say. What's that? She used to say that some things that look like people aren't people at all, and those things have rules they have to follow. The creature's black eyes narrowed. Rules? You can't just take someone. You have to be invited in some way. That's why you spent 3 weeks studying me instead of just killing me outright. You needed me to accept you, to trust you, to let you get close. Very good, Franklin. What else? You can't cross certain barriers. Iron, salt, blessed sage. I stood up, holding the iron spike like a weapon. And you can't stand the truth. The creature took a step backward. The truth? The truth is that you're not Jake Morrison. You're not even close. Jake was a good man who carried pain but never let it break him. You're just a parasite wearing a dead man's face. I struck the iron spike against the cave wall, sending up sparks. The creature hissed and recoiled. "The truth is that you're afraid," I continued, pulling out the rock salt. "That's why you hide. Why you steal identities instead of making your own way. You're a coward." I threw the salt at its feet, and where it landed, the ground began to smoke. "And the truth is," I said, lighting the sage with a waterproof match, "you picked the wrong man to study." The smoke from the burning sage filled the cave, and the creature began to scream, not with Jake's voice anymore, but with something older and more terrible. Its stolen skin began to bubble and crack, revealing something underneath that I couldn't quite make out in the flickering light. "You think this will stop me?" It shrieked. "You think your primitive rituals have power?" "I think," I said, advancing with the burning sage, "that you're about to find out." The creature lunged at me, but the sage smoke seemed to slow it down, make it clumsy. I managed to touch the burning bundle to its chest, and it screamed again, a sound that made the cave walls tremble. Then it was running, fleeing into the night with its stolen skin hanging in tatters. I followed it out of the cave and watched it disappear into the forest, leaving a trail of something that might have been blood or might have been shadows. I didn't follow. I'd learned enough about monsters to know that sometimes making them run away is victory enough. I hiked out of the mountains at first light and didn't stop until I reached the ranger station in town. I told them everything about Jake's death, about the creature that had been impersonating him, about the missing bodies and the impossible tracks. They listened politely and then suggested I take some time off. Dr. Patricia Vance from the FBI showed up 3 days later. She asked a lot of questions and took a lot of notes, but I could tell she didn't believe me either. Not until she saw the photographs. I'd managed to get pictures of the tracks, of Tom Peterson's desiccated body before it disappeared, of the claw marks on the cabin door frame. The photos didn't prove anything supernatural, but they proved that something unexplained had happened in those mountains. "Officially, Dr. Vance told me after our final interview, Jake Morrison died in an accidental fall while investigating a missing persons case. Tom Peterson died of exposure after becoming lost on a hiking trail. The case is closed." "And unofficially?" She studied me for a long moment. "Unofficially, I think you encountered something that doesn't fit into our normal understanding of the world, and I think you survived an experience that would have destroyed most people. Do you believe it's still out there?" "I believe," she said carefully, "that these mountains are very old and very large, and that we don't know everything that lives in them." 6 months later, I transferred to a different district. I told everyone it was because I needed a change of scenery, but the truth was that I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I saw someone who looked like Jake, every time I heard his laugh or his voice, my heart would start racing. Because the thing about shapeshifters is that you never know if they're really gone. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, wondering if the person in the mirror is really me, or just something that's learned to be me very, very well. I check for details that only I would know: scars, birthmarks, memories that I've never shared with anyone. So far, I'm still me, but I've learned to carry iron in my pocket and salt in my truck. I've learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even if I can't explain why. And I've learned that the Cherokee stories about these mountains aren't just folklore. They're warnings. Sometimes, late at night, I get calls from other rangers in other states. They ask about unusual missing persons cases, about bodies found in impossible conditions, about the feeling that something is watching from the tree line. I listen to their stories and give what advice I can, but I always end the calls the same way. If someone you know starts acting different, even in small ways, don't give them the benefit of the doubt. Trust your instincts. And remember that some things that look human aren't human at all. Because somewhere out there, in mountains or forests, or maybe just in the shadows between streetlights, there are things that feed on more than flesh and blood. They feed on identity itself, on the very essence of what makes us who we are. And they're always hungry. My name is Maggie Fairchild, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years now. I love my job, especially working with kids. There's something special about watching a city child see their first deer or learn to start a campfire. Maybe it's because I never had kids of my own, but every group that comes through these woods feels like family to me. December 19th, 1973. I remember that date like it happened yesterday because it's when everything went wrong. I was stationed at George Washington National Forest in Virginia, way back in the Shenandoah backcountry. My assignment that week was simple: supervise a scout troop camping trip in an area we called Lost Souls Hollow. 12 kids, ages 8 to 14, led by their scout leader, Bill Morrison. Just a 3-day winter camping experience to earn their cold weather badges. The hollow got its name from some old tragedy back in the 1890s. Local folks said a group of children from a church had gotten lost in a blizzard on Malk, Christmas Eve, 1892. All 19 of them froze to death, trying to find shelter. You could still see the ruins of their settlement, Helficht. Old stone foundations covered in moss, a collapsed chimney, and a frozen pond that never seemed to thaw completely, even in summer. That was just old stories. Ghost tales that made the campfire more exciting. The kids arrived Tuesday morning, piling out of the scout van like puppies, chattering about Christmas coming up, about the fairy tale ruins they'd heard about how cool it would be to camp in a place with a spooky history. Bill Morrison was a good leader. Patient, experienced. The kind of guy who knew how to keep kids safe while still letting them have adventures. "This place gives me the creeps," said one of the older boys, staring at the stone ruins covered in fresh snow. "That's the point," laughed Sarah, a tough 12-year-old with red braids. "It's supposed to be scary." Little Tommy Chen, the youngest at 9, 50 years old, wasn't laughing. He stood apart from the group, shivering despite his heavy winter coat. "It's really cold here," he whispered to me. "Colder than everywhere else." I checked my thermometer. 32 degrees. Chilly but normal for December. Tommy's hands felt like ice through his gloves. "Just need to get your blood moving, buddy," I told him, but something about his pale face worried me. The weather forecast called for light snow, maybe an inch or two. Perfect camping weather. But by Tuesday evening, something felt wrong. The wind picked up faster than expected. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an hour. My radio started crackling with static from the weather station. Storm system moving in faster than predicted. Came the broken transmission. Recommend early evacuation. But the roads were already getting slick, ice forming too quickly, too thick. By Wednesday morning, we were stuck. That's when the game started. I found the kids playing Ring, around the Rosie, in the exact spot where the old church foundation sat. Not unusual, kids love to play games. But they were singing it wrong, in words I didn't recognize. Old words. Strange words. "We all fall down," they chanted, and when they collapsed in the snow, they stayed down too long. Just lying there, smiling up at the gray sky, their breath making little clouds that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should. "Come on, guys," Bill called. Time to get warm by the fire. But they didn't want to come in. They said they were having too much fun with their new friends. "What new friends?" I asked Sarah. She pointed to the empty air around the stone ruins. "Can't you see them? They're right there. They want to play some more." My radio crackled. I grabbed it, tried to call for help, but all I got was static and something that sounded almost like children singing Christmas carols. Very old Christmas carols, in a language that might have been German or Dutch. The temperature kept dropping. My breath came out in thick puffs. The thermometer read 20 degrees, then 15, then 10. Too cold, too fast. And Tommy Chen was getting paler by the hour. By Wednesday night, I knew we were in real trouble. The storm hit harder than anything the Weather Service had predicted. Snow piled up 3 feet deep in just a few hours. The radio tower must have iced over because all I could get was static, mixed with those strange Christmas songs that seemed to drift out of the air itself. Bill Morrison had his camera with him, one of those new video cameras that recorded onto cassette tapes. He was documenting the trip for the Scout newsletter. Wednesday evening, he filmed the kids singing around the campfire. When he played the tape back, there were more voices than there should have been. "Count them," he whispered to me, rewinding the tape. "Count the voices." I listened carefully. 12 young voices singing Silent Night in English. But underneath, weaving through the melody, were other voices. Older-sounding voices, singing the same song but in a different language. More than 12, many more. Equipment malfunction, Bill said, but his hands were shaking as he put the camera away. That night, 3 of the kids developed hypothermia symptoms, despite being inside heated tents with proper cold weather gear. Their lips turned blue. Their fingers went numb. Tommy Chen's core body temperature dropped to 94 degrees. Dangerous territory. "We need medical evacuation," I told Bill. "Now." But when I went outside to try the emergency radio one more time, the kids were already out there, all 12 of them, standing in the snow in their pajamas and bare feet, not shivering, not even seeming to notice the cold. They stood in a perfect circle around the stone foundation, holding hands. But the circle was too big. Way too big for 12 children. "Kids!" I shouted. "Get back. Inside right now." They turned to look at me, and their eyes reflected the moonlight like animals. Sarah smiled, her lips blue with cold, but her expression peaceful. "We're not cold anymore, Miss Maggie," she said. "Our friends taught us how not to be cold." I ran toward them, but my feet kept slipping on ice that hadn't been there moments before. The temperature plummeted so fast I could feel my exposed skin stinging. My breath came out in clouds so thick I couldn't see through them. When the clouds cleared, the kids were gone. I found them inside their tents 5 minutes later, tucked into their sleeping bags, sound asleep. When I checked on them, they were warm and dry. Their feet were clean, no trace of snow or ice. "Bad dream," Bill mumbled when I woke him up to tell him what happened. "You're stressed about the storm." But in the morning, he found something that made him stop talking about bad dreams. Footprints in the snow. 31 sets of them, leading from the tents to the stone circle and back. Small feet, child-sized. But we only had 12 kids. And some of the prints looked old, really old. Like they'd been made by old-fashioned leather shoes instead of modern snow boots. Bill grabbed his camera and filmed the footprints. When he played back the footage, you could see our 12 kids walking in a line toward the ruins. But in the snow around them, other shapes moved. Transparent shapes that only showed up clearly on the camera. Children in old-fashioned clothes, Victorian winter coats, and knitted scarves and button-up boots. 19 of them. "This isn't possible," Bill whispered, watching the tape over and over. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching little Tommy Chen in the footage. As he walked toward the stone circle, he started to look transparent too, fading in and out like a ghost himself. And by Thursday morning, we couldn't wake him up. His body was there, breathing, slowly in his sleeping bag, but his skin felt cold as marble, and no amount of shaking or shouting could open his eyes. When I checked his pulse, it was barely there, slow and weak, like he was drifting away from us. "Tommy," I shouted. "Tommy, come back." His eyes fluttered open for just a second, and he smiled at me. "I'm learning their games, Miss Maggie," he whispered. "They have the best games. We're going to play forever." Then his eyes closed again, and this time nothing I did could wake him up. That's when Bill Morrison made the call that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "I'm going out there," he said, grabbing his camera. "I'm going to film whatever's happening and get proof. People need to know." The last thing he recorded was his own death. I found Bill's body Thursday evening, sitting upright against the stone foundation, like he'd just decided to rest for a minute. His camera was still running, pointed at his own face. Ice crystals covered his beard and eyebrows. His skin was blue-white, frozen solid, but his finger was still on the record button. I rewound the tape with shaking hands. The footage showed Bill walking toward the ruins at sunset, talking quietly to himself. "Temperature is dropping fast," he was saying to the camera. "Maybe 15 below zero now, but the kids don't seem to notice. They're out here again." The camera panned across the snow-covered foundation. At first, it looked empty. Then gradually, shapes began to appear. Faint at first, like heat mirages, then clearer and clearer. Children. Lots of children. Some in modern winter gear. They're dangerous. Our kids. But others in old-fashioned clothes, heavy wool coats, and hand-knitted mittens and leather boots that laced up high. Victorian children with pale, serious faces and eyes that held too much knowledge. They were playing games. Ring Around the Rosie, but different. London Bridge, but with words I'd never heard before. Red Rover, but when they called someone over, the person would disappear for a moment before reappearing on the other side. Jesus Christ. Bill's voice whispered from the tape. They're really there. They're all really there. The camera zoomed in on Tommy Chen. He was holding hands with a girl in a long gray dress and white apron. She looked about his age, with dark hair and braids and a sweet smile. As I watched, Tommy started to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone was slowly turning down his brightness. No, Bill said on the tape, and I could hear him starting to run. No, Tommy, don't. The camera jerked as Bill stumbled. When the picture steadied, all the children were looking directly at him. 31 pairs of eyes, modern and Victorian, all focused on the camera with the same expression. They weren't angry. They weren't scary. They just looked lonely. The Victorian girl holding Tommy's hand stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice came through the camera's microphone clear as a bell, with a slight accent that sounded old-fashioned. Please don't take them away, she said. We've been waiting so long for friends. We just want to play. Let the boy go, Bill said, and I could hear the terror in his voice. Let them all go. They don't want to go, said another ghost child, a boy in knee pants and suspenders. They like our games. They want to stay and play forever. The temperature on the tape plummeted so fast that frost began forming on the camera lens. Bill's breathing became visible as thick white clouds. Within seconds, his breath started coming in short gasps. Can't breathe, he wheezed. Too cold. Can't. The ghost children began to sing. A Christmas carol in that strange old language, their voices pure and sweet and terrifying. As they sang, the cold intensified. Ice began forming on everything, the trees, the ruins, Bill's camera, Bill himself. The last clear image on the tape was Tommy Chen, now, almost completely transparent, turning to wave at the camera. Behind him, the 19 ghost children smiled and waved too. Then the picture went black. When I found Bill, the camera was still running, but all it recorded was darkness and the sound of children laughing and playing in the distance. I tried to gather the surviving kids, only 8 of them now, with 4 others faded away like Tommy. But when I got back to the campsite, they were packing their things. We're going to stay with our new friends, Sarah announced. Her voice sounded different, older somehow. They have a better place to camp. Sarah, no, I said. It's not safe. Those aren't real children. She looked at me with pity, like I was the child and she was the adult. They're more real than anything, Miss Maggie. They've been waiting since 1892 for someone to play with. Don't you think that's sad? They're dead, Sarah. So? Said Marcus, one of the older boys. That just means they have more time to play. No school, no chores, no grown-ups telling them to come inside. Just games and fun forever. I tried to physically stop them, but they walked right through me. Actually, through me, like I was the ghost and they were solid. My hands passed through their bodies like they were made of cold air. They picked up their backpacks and walked toward the stone ruins, chattering excitedly about the games they were going to play. As they walked, they began to fade, becoming more and more transparent with each step. Sarah, I screamed. Marcus, come back. But they just waved goodbye and kept walking, until I couldn't see them anymore. That night, alone in my tent, with the temperature dropping to 20 below, I heard them. All of them. 27 children now, playing and laughing and singing Christmas songs in the snow. Their voices carried on the wind, joyful and innocent and completely terrifying. I tried the radio one more time. Nothing but static and the distant sound of children playing games I'd never heard of. I was trapped in Lost Souls Hollow with an entity that was stealing children and turning them into ghosts. And I only had 4 kids left to save. Friday morning, I woke up to find my tent surrounded by small handprints in the snow. Perfect little palm prints, dozens of them, pressed against the fabric walls like children had been trying to peek inside. The 4 remaining kids, Jessica, Brian, Amanda, and little Kevin, were sitting by the dead campfire, wide awake, staring at the ruins. They want us to come play the final game, Jessica said without looking at me. Her voice was dreamy, distant. It's almost Christmas Eve. That's when the game ends. What game? I asked. The choosing game, said Brian. Whoever joins them on Christmas Eve gets to stay forever. The others, he shrugged. The others have to go back to being alive. I checked my watch. December 22nd. Christmas Eve was 2 days away. You're not going anywhere. I said firmly. We're hiking out of here today, storm or no storm. But when I looked at the trail that led out of the hollow, it wasn't there anymore. The path I'd hiked dozens of times had simply vanished, replaced by unbroken forest. Trees that hadn't been there the day before now blocked every route I knew. The ghost children were changing the landscape itself. That afternoon, I saw them clearly for the first time. I was gathering firewood when I heard singing coming from the frozen pond. When I looked over, there they were, all 27 children, modern and Victorian, playing on the ice. They were skating, but none of them had skates on. They glided across the surface in their regular shoes, laughing and spinning and calling out to each other. The Victorian children looked exactly like kids from Christmas cards. WS, rosy cheeks, bright eyes, dressed in their Sunday best despite the cold. The girl who'd taken Tommy's hand wore a dark blue velvet dress with white lace collar. A boy about 12 had on a wool suit with short pants and tall socks. They looked healthy and happy and completely alive. Except they cast no shadows on the ice. My 4 remaining kids sat on a fallen log, watching the skating party with longing in their eyes. "It looks like fun," Amanda whispered. "It is fun," said a voice behind me. I spun around. The girl in the blue velvet dress was standing right there, solid as life, smiling at me with genuine warmth. "Hello, Miss Maggie," she said. "My name is Eleanor. I've been waiting to talk to you." Her voice was sweet and polite, with that old-fashioned accent. She looked about 10 years old, with dark hair and perfect ringlets, and eyes the color of winter sky. "You're the one who's been taking the children," I said. "Taking?" Eleanor looked genuinely confused. "Oh no, Miss Maggie. We don't take anyone. We just play together. And if they choose to stay, well, that's their choice, isn't it? They're children. They don't understand what they're choosing." Eleanor's expression grew sad. "Don't they? When we died in 1892, we understood. We knew we were freezing, knew we wouldn't see spring again. But we also knew we could stay together, keep playing, never grow up, and have our games ruined by grown-up worries." She gestured toward the pond, where Tommy Chen was now skating with the other children, his face bright with joy. "Tommy was so sad when he came here," Eleanor continued. "His parents fight all the time. They're getting divorced, did you know? He cries himself to sleep every night. But here, with us, he never has to be sad again." My heart sank. I hadn't known about Tommy's family problems. What about Sarah? Marcus? The others? "Sarah's father drinks too much and yells at her mother," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "Marcus gets picked on at school because he's different. They all have hurts in the grown-up world. But children's hurts heal when you have the right friends to play with." I looked at my remaining 4 kids. Jessica's parents had died in a car accident last year. Brian stammered so badly he barely spoke at school. Amanda had been held back a grade and felt stupid. Little Kevin was afraid of everything. "You're offering them escape," I said, "not healing." Eleanor tilted her head, studying me. "What's the difference? In the grown-up world, children have to go to school and do chores and follow rules and eventually become sad, worried adults. Here, it's Christmas Eve forever, games forever, friends forever. No one grows up, no one gets hurt, no one has to say goodbye." She had a point, and that scared me more than anything. "The choice has to be made on Christmas Eve," Eleanor continued. "At midnight, any children who want to stay with us can join our eternal game. Any who want to leave, well, they'll be free to go. The magic only works on Christmas Eve, you see. That's when we died, so that's when others can choose to join us. And if they choose to stay?" Eleanor's smile was radiant. "Then Christmas morning, we'll have the best Christmas party ever. All 27 of us together, playing in the snow, singing carols, opening presents that never run out of surprises. Forever and ever." I looked at Jessica, Brian, Amanda, and Kevin. They were listening to every word, and I could see the longing in their faces. The temptation. "What about me?" I asked. Eleanor's expression grew apologetic. "Adults can't play our games, Miss Maggie. You're too old. But you could stay and watch over us, if you wanted. Make sure we're safe and happy. Be our guardian." "Forever?" "Time doesn't work the same way here. Forever might feel like a long summer afternoon." I had until midnight on Christmas Eve to figure out how to save my kids from the kindest, most loving horror I'd ever encountered. Christmas Eve arrived gray and still, with snow falling in perfect silence. At 11 p.m., I gathered Jessica, Brian, Amanda, and Kevin around our campfire one last time. In an hour, they would have to choose between their real lives and an eternity of games with the ghost children. I want you to think about something, I told them. Eleanor and her friends died before they could grow up. They never got to fall in love or have children of their own or see what they might become. They're stuck being 10 years old forever. But they're happy, Jessica said. Are they, or are they just paused? Frozen in one moment, never able to move forward. I looked across the hollow, where the 23 ghost children were preparing for midnight. They'd built snow angels and snowmen, decorated the ruins with pine boughs, and were singing Christmas carols in their mix of languages. Tommy Chen was there among them, translucent but smiling, helping to hang icicles like ornaments. Your lives right now have sad parts, I continued. Hard parts, but they also have tomorrow, and next week, and next year. You can grow and change and become anything you want. Those children can only be what they were on the day they died. At 11:45, Eleanor appeared beside our fire, beautiful in her blue velvet dress, her eyes bright with anticipation. It's almost time, she said sweetly. Who's ready to come play with us forever? Jessica stood up first. My heart broke as she walked toward Eleanor, then stopped. Will I ever see my parents again? She asked. Oh, child, Eleanor said gently. Where you're going, you won't miss them. You won't miss anyone from the grown-up world. But I love them, Jessica said quietly. Even though they're gone, I still love them, and my aunt who's taking care of me now, she tries so hard to make me happy. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. Love fades when you have eternal friendship. I don't want my love to fade, Jessica said, and stepped back toward our fire. Brian was next. He walked right up to Eleanor, stammering worse than ever in his nervousness. Will I still Saint stutter if I stay? You'll never need to worry about talking to grown-ups again, Eleanor assured him. But I'm getting better, Brian said. My speech teacher says so, and maybe someday I'll be able to talk normal. I want to try. He stepped back too. Amanda looked at the ghost children longingly. It does look like fun, she said. No homework, no tests, no feeling stupid. Never, Eleanor promised. But if I never feel stupid, how will I feel proud when I finally understand something hard? Amanda asked. Eleanor had no answer for that. Little Kevin, only 6 years old, walked all the way to Eleanor and took her hand. I want to stay, he whispered. I want to not be scared anymore. Eleanor's face lit up with joy. Oh, wonderful. You'll love it here, Kevin. We have the most amazing games. Wait, I called out, and Kevin stopped. Kevin, what are you most afraid of? Everything, he said. The dark and loud noises and big dogs and being alone. And what happened last month when that big dog ran toward you in the park? Kevin thought. I stood my ground, and it just wanted to play. You were brave. You faced your fear and discovered it wasn't as big as you thought. If you never feel fear again, how will you ever discover how brave you can be? Kevin looked at Eleanor, then back at me. Will I still be able to be brave if I'm never scared? Eleanor's perfect composure cracked just a little. You won't need to be brave. You'll be safe forever. But I like being brave, Kevin said, and stepped back to our group. At exactly midnight, Eleanor's expression shifted. The kindness remained, but underneath it, I saw something ancient and desperate. This is your last chance, she said, her voice carrying a note of pleading. Choose to stay, and you'll never hurt. Again. All 4 children looked at her, then at me, then at their ghost friends playing in the snow. We choose to go home, Jessica said firmly. All of us. Eleanor's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like what she really was, a scared little girl who'd been alone for over 80 years. But we've been waiting so long, she whispered. Maybe it's time to stop waiting, I said gently. Maybe it's time to let go. Eleanor looked around at the other ghost children, who had stopped their games to watch. Tommy Chen, still translucent, walked over to us. I choose to go back too, he said. I miss my mom, even when she's sad. One by one, the other modern children made the same choice. And as they chose to return to the living world, They became solid again, whole again. Eleanor and her Victorian friends watched sadly as the modern children gathered around me. "What happens to you now?" I asked her. Eleanor's smile returned, softer now but real. I think we finally understand what we've been missing. You can't have eternal joy without the possibility of sorrow. Games aren't fun if they never end." As dawn broke on Christmas morning, Eleanor and her friends began to fade, not into transparency, but into peace. They were finally ready to let go, to move on to whatever comes after childhood games. I led all 8 children out of Lost Souls Hollow on Christmas morning. The path was there again, clear and easy to follow. But I still go back sometimes, on Christmas Eve, to leave toys and treats by the old stone ruins. Because somewhere out there, in a place between memory and winter dreams, 19 children are finally growing up at last, learning that the most beautiful games are the ones that eventually end, because ending makes room for new beginnings. And every Christmas Eve, if you listen carefully to the wind through the hollow, you can still hear them playing. But they're different games now, not eternal repetitions, but joyful explorations of what comes next. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give children is the chance to become something more than they were. Even ghost children, especially ghost children. My name is Jack Mulligan, but everyone calls me Bear. Been a park ranger for 27 years now, and I've seen things in these mountains that would make your hair stand on end. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on Grandfather Mountain in October of 1959. I was 54 then, getting close to retirement. The young rangers called me old-timer, but I didn't mind. Age brings wisdom, especially when you're dealing with the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. These peaks have moods like a cranky old woman, and you better respect them or they'll kill you. The hurricane had just blown through, leaving a mess of broken trees and washed-out roads. Power lines were down for 200 miles in every direction. That's when the Park Service sent me up to Eagle's Nest, the radio station on top of Grandfather Mountain. At 6,000 feet, it was the highest communication point in the region. Someone had to get those radio towers working again. I'd been alone on mountains before. Preferred it, actually. People talk too much, make too much noise. The mountains speak their own language, and you need quiet to hear it. My wife Sarah used to say I was part mountain goat, the way I could climb and live up there for weeks at a time. The Cherokee had a different name for Grandfather Mountain, called it Tanawa the Great Hawk. Their legend said spirits lived up there, protecting sacred places from people who didn't belong. I always figured that was just old stories, the kind every mountain has. I should have listened to those stories. The ride up was rough. My Jeep bounced and slipped on the muddy trail, past broken trees and rock slides. The air got thinner as I climbed, and fog rolled in thick as cotton. By the time I reached the radio station, I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The station was a small cabin with 3 tall radio towers sticking up like metal fingers. Hurricane winds had twisted one tower into scrap metal. The other 2 were standing, but the cables were torn up pretty bad. I figured it would take me 3, maybe 4 days to get everything working again. I unloaded my gear and checked my equipment. Military radio from the war, backup batteries, tools, and enough food for a week. The cabin had a wood stove and thick walls. I'd been in worse places. That first night, I got a fire going and tried the radio. Static mostly, but I picked up a few weak signals from towns down in the valley. Everything seemed normal. Then I heard the footsteps on the roof. Heavy steps, real heavy, like someone wearing boots filled with concrete was walking around up there, but that was impossible. The roof was steep metal, slick from the fog. Nobody could walk on it without sliding off. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the roof, but I listened hard. The steps had stopped. Maybe it was just a tree branch that had fallen and was sliding around. But tree branches don't walk in steady patterns. I went back inside and checked my rifle. Old habit from Vietnam, always know where your weapon is. The footsteps started again, right above my head. This time they moved from one end of the cabin to the other, slow and deliberate. I was starting to think maybe I wasn't as alone on this mountain as I thought. Dawn came gray and cold. The fog had lifted some, but the air felt wrong. You know how the morning after a bad storm usually feels clean and fresh? This didn't. It felt heavy, like the mountain was holding its breath. I climbed up to check the damaged radio tower. That's when I found the first footprint. 18 inches long, shaped like a human foot, but way too big. The toes were spread wide, and the print was pressed deep into the mud, deeper than my own boot prints, and I weighed over 200 pounds. Whatever made this track was heavy. Real heavy. I followed the prints around the cabin. They went in a perfect circle, like something had been walking around and around all night, studying the place. The stride was long, maybe 4 feet between steps. I tried to match it and couldn't without jumping. My radio crackled to life. "Eagle's Nest, this is Base. Come in, Bear." I keyed the microphone. "Base, this is Eagle's Nest." I copy. "How's the repair work going up there?" I looked at the footprints again. Slower than expected. Tower damage is pretty bad. Might need extra parts. Copy that. We've got a climbing party reported missing on the north face. Can you keep an eye out? Will do. How many climbers? 5 college kids from Asheville. Been overdue since yesterday morning. Great. Just what I needed, search and rescue work on top of everything else. I'll watch for signals from them. Thanks, Bear. You're our only eyes and ears up there until we get the other stations back online. I spent the morning working on the radio equipment. The job was taking longer than expected because my tools kept disappearing. I'd set down a wrench, turn around, and it would be gone. Found it later in completely different places on top of the radio, inside the toolbox, once even outside in the mud. At first, I figured I was just tired and forgetting where I put things. But when my compass started spinning like a top every time I got near the north side of the cabin, I knew something was messing with my equipment. Around noon, I heard voices calling from somewhere down the mountain, faint, but definitely human. I grabbed my binoculars and climbed up on the cabin roof to get a better look. The fog had cleared enough to see the north face, a steep wall of granite that dropped away for thousands of feet. Experienced climbers loved it because it was challenging. Stupid climbers died on it because it was dangerous. I spotted movement about halfway down the cliff. 3 tiny figures clinging to the rock face. They were too far away to hear clearly, but they were definitely in trouble. I got on the radio. "Base, this is Eagle's Nest. I've got visual contact with climbers on north face. They appear to be in distress." Copy, Eagle's Nest. "Can you determine their condition?" I looked through the binoculars again. The climbers were moving, but something was wrong. They kept looking up at something above them on the cliff. Looking up and pointing, like they were scared of something. "Base, the climbers are." Wait a minute. A shadow moved across the cliff face, above the climbers. A big shadow, way too big to be human. "Eagle's Nest report." The shadow moved again, and I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound like rocks falling, but the rocks were falling upward. Big chunks of granite were flying up from the cliff face and disappearing over the top of the mountain. "Base, we've got a problem up here. Something's throwing rocks at the climbers." "Say again, Eagle's Nest?" I watched as one of the climbers lost his grip. He didn't fall down the cliff like he should have. He fell up, like gravity had reversed itself. His scream echoed off the mountain walls as he disappeared over the ridge. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Eagle's Nest, please respond." "Base, I think we've lost one of the climbers, but not the way you'd expect." That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. A figure standing on top of the cliff, silhouetted against the gray sky, 15 feet tall, covered in dark hair. Built like a man, but way too big to be human. It was holding something in its hands, the climber who had fallen up. The giant looked down at the remaining climbers, then looked directly at me. Even from a mile away, I could feel those eyes staring into my soul. Old eyes, ancient eyes. Eyes that had been watching these mountains for a very long time. The giant raised the climber over its head and threw him down the mountain like he was a rag doll. Then it pointed at me. I got back on the radio, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the microphone. "Base, this is Eagle's Nest. We have a situation up here. Major situation. Go ahead, Eagle's Nest." How do you tell someone you just watched a 15-foot giant kill a man? How do you explain that gravity works backward on Grandfather Mountain? "Base, all climbers on north face are down. Repeat, all climbers are down. do not send rescue teams. Bear, what happened up there? Rock slide. Big one, nobody could survive it. It was a lie, but the truth would just get more people killed. I spent the rest of the day working on the radios, but I kept watching the ridgeline. The giant was still up there somewhere. I could feel it watching me. As evening came on, I found the first body, Phil Garrett, according to his wallet. 23 years old, college student from Asheville. He was sitting upright against a pine tree, like he'd just stopped to rest. But he was crushed flat from the waist down. No human could have done that. What really bothered me was how he'd been positioned. Sitting up, facing the mountain peak, arms folded in his lap, like someone had arranged him that way on purpose. Like someone wanted me to find him. I searched until dark and found 2 more bodies. Same thing, crushed but carefully positioned. Sarah Chen, 19, arranged sitting by a stream. Mike Foster, 21, propped against a boulder with his climbing gear neatly stacked beside him. All of them facing the peak. All of them set up like they were waiting for something. That night, the giant came to visit. I was inside the cabin, trying to get some sleep, when the footsteps started again. But this time they weren't just on the roof. They were all around the cabin, slow, heavy steps circling the building over and over. I grabbed my rifle and peered out the window. The moon was up, casting long shadows through the fog. I could see something moving out there, too tall to be human, too big to be any animal I knew. It stopped right outside the window and looked in. I'll never forget that face, covered in dark hair, with features that were almost human but not quite. The eyes were the worst part, intelligent, sad, and angry all at the same time. This thing wasn't just some animal. It was thinking. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. Then, it reached out one massive hand and tapped on the glass. 3 times, gentle as you please. Tap, 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 like it was knocking, asking permission to come in. I raised my rifle, but the giant just shook its head slowly. It pointed at the weapon, then pointed down the mountain. The message was clear. Guns wouldn't help, and I should leave. Instead of breaking in, it walked away. But I could hear it moving around outside for the rest of the night, rearranging things. My tools, spare parts, even my Jeep, everything was in different places, come morning. The next day, I found the last 2 climbers, Jenny Walsh and Tom Rodriguez, both 20, both dead. But these 2 were different. They were arranged in a circle with the other bodies, all facing inward toward a pile of rocks that hadn't been there before. The rocks were stacked in a perfect pattern, like some kind of altar or monument, and carved into the biggest rock, scratched deep with what must have been claws, were symbols I didn't recognize. But I'd seen similar markings before. In Cherokee museums. This was writing, ancient writing. The giant wasn't just killing people, it was trying to communicate. That afternoon, my radio picked up something impossible. Voices speaking in Cherokee, but not from any transmitter I could identify. The words were old, formal, like prayers or ceremonies. And underneath the voices, I could hear crying, the sound of children crying. I tried to respond, but every time I keyed the microphone, the voices would stop, like they knew I was listening. As the sun went down, I saw lights moving up the mountain. Rescue teams, probably coming to look for the missing climbers. I tried to warn them off on the radio, but my transmission wouldn't go through. The giant was jamming my signal. I watched through binoculars as 6 rescue workers climbed the North Face Trail. They had flashlights and climbing gear, moving slow and careful in the dark. They never saw it coming. The giant stepped out from behind a rock formation like it had been waiting. In the moonlight, it looked even bigger than before. The rescue team saw it and froze. What happened next was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. The giant picked them up one by one and threw them off the cliff. Not in anger, but methodically, like it was clearing weeds from a garden. Their screams echoed off the mountain walls until the sound faded into nothing. 6 more people dead, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. That's when I realized the truth. The giant wasn't randomly killing people. It was protecting something. And whatever it was guarding, it was somewhere up on that peak. The 3rd night, the giant came to the cabin and didn't leave. I could hear it moving around outside, but this time the sounds were different. Not threatening. More like it was. Working on something. In the morning, I found out what. The giant had built a trail, not a rough mountain path, but a carefully constructed route leading up toward the peak. Rocks had been moved, fallen trees cleared away, even handholds carved into the cliff faces. It was an invitation. At the start of the trail, scratched into a flat rock, was a simple drawing. A stick figure man walking up toward a mountain peak. Below that, more Cherokee symbols. The giant wanted me to follow it. I should have radioed for help, should have packed up and hiked down the mountain as fast as I could go. But those Cherokee voices on the radio were getting stronger, and I was starting to understand some of the words. Children, death, sacred ground, revenge. This wasn't just about protecting territory. Something terrible had happened on this mountain, and the giant was the only one left who remembered. I loaded my pack with supplies and followed the trail. The climb was hard but manageable. The giant had made sure of that. Every dangerous spot had been made safe. Every difficult passage had steps carved into the rock. It took me 4 hours to reach the peak. What I found there changed everything. Hidden behind a natural rock wall was a cave entrance, so well concealed I would have walked past it a dozen times without noticing. But the giant had moved the rocks aside, revealing a passage that led deep into the mountain. Cherokee symbols were carved everywhere around the entrance, and at the base of the rock wall, arranged in neat rows, were human skulls. Lots of them. Some old and yellowed, some still fresh. But these weren't the skulls of climbers or hikers. They were too small. Children's skulls. I followed the passage into the cave, using my flashlight to navigate. The walls were covered in paintings, Cherokee art showing families, ceremonies, daily life. But toward the back of the cave, the paintings changed. Soldiers, blue uniforms, rifles, fire. Cherokee families being driven from their homes. And then the final paintings, the worst ones. Cherokee children being forced up the mountain to starve and freeze in winter storms. This was a mass grave, a secret burial place for Cherokee children who had died during the Trail of Tears in 1838. And that's where I found the giant. It was sitting in the deepest part of the cave, surrounded by small skeletons arranged in perfect rows. Its huge hands were gentle as it tended to the bones, straightening them, positioning them with care. When it saw me, it didn't attack. Instead, it spoke, not in English, but somehow I understood. Maybe it was telepathy, maybe just the sadness in its voice. But I heard its story as clearly as if it had been speaking my language. Its name was Selutistu, which meant corn giant in Cherokee. It had been chosen by the tribal elders to guard the sacred places when the soldiers came, but it had failed. The children had been driven up the mountain anyway, and they had died in the cold and snow. For over 100 years, Selutistu had stayed here, protecting their graves from being disturbed. The climbers, the hikers, the rescue workers, they were all bringing more people to this sacred place, more feet to trample on the graves of innocent children. So it had killed them, not out of evil, but out of grief and duty. I sat down across from the giant and we looked at each other. Two old soldiers, both trying to do our jobs, both protecting something important. I understand, I told it, but there has to be another way. The giant tilted its massive head and listened as I explained about park boundaries, restricted areas, ways to keep people away without killing them. It considered this for a long time. Then it pointed to the radio on my belt and back to itself. It wanted to learn about modern communication. That was 3 years ago. I never left Grandfather Mountain. Officially, I'm listed as missing, disappeared, during the hurricane repairs in October 1959. But unofficially, I'm exactly where I need to be. Selutistu and I worked out a partnership. I taught it about radios, about how to send false signals and redirect hikers to safer trails. It showed me the old Cherokee ways, the proper ceremonies for honoring the dead. We moved all the children's remains deeper into the cave system, where they'll never be disturbed. Selutistu performed the proper burial rites, and for the first time in over a century, those little spirits could rest in peace. The killing stopped. The giant's grief finally began to heal. Now, when climbers call requesting permission to climb the north face, they get radio responses directing them to other areas. Equipment malfunctions at just the right times. Weather reports suddenly turn bad. People find dozens of good reasons to climb somewhere else. The mountain is protected, and nobody has to die. I've gotten older up here, but I've never been happier. Sarah passed away 2 winters ago. Got word through a ham radio operator, but somehow I think she would understand. This is important work. Salutsis has changed too. The anger is gone, replaced by the kind of peace that comes from a duty well done. Sometimes, late at night, we sit by the cave entrance and listen to the wind in the trees. It sounds almost like Cherokee children laughing and playing. Last month, a young hiker got lost on the mountain during a snowstorm. Instead of letting him freeze, Salutsis guided him to safety, staying just out of sight. The hiker made it down, alive, talking about mysterious footprints and the feeling that something was watching over him. That's how it should be. The Cherokee called beings like Selutistu Nunahe the immortal ones who help travelers in need. Protectors, not killers. My radio still works, and sometimes I pick up signals from the outside world. The country's changing fast: space programs, civil rights, new wars in far-off places. But up here on Grandfather Mountain, time moves differently. The children sleep peacefully in their cave, watched over by their ancient guardian. The mountain itself seems calmer now, like an old wound finally beginning to heal. And if you ever try to climb the north face of Grandfather Mountain, you might get a radio call suggesting a different route. You might find your equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. You might even catch a glimpse of something impossibly large moving through the trees. Listen to those warnings. Take them seriously. Some places are too sacred to disturb, and some guardians never sleep. My name is Jack Bear Mulligan, and this is my mountain now too. My name is Cornelius Ashford, but everyone calls me Neil. I've been a park ranger for 21 years, and in all that time, I've never written anything down that I didn't have to. But what happened to me in Hell Hollow? Well, I need to tell someone, even if nobody believes it. I'm 47 years old, got a PhD in geology, and I know rocks better than I know people. That's probably why Martha left me last year. She said I cared more about limestone than our daughter Jenny. Maybe she was right. Jenny's 16 now and won't even talk to me on the phone. So when my boss asked me to do a solo survey of Hell Hollow in the Daniel Boone National Forest, I jumped at the chance. 3 weeks alone in the Kentucky wilderness, studying cave systems and underground rivers. No ex-wife asking why I'm never home. No daughter rolling her eyes at everything I say. Just me, my equipment, and the rocks. I should have known better. Hell Hollow got its name for a reason. The locals in the nearby town of Slade wouldn't even sell me supplies when I told them where I was headed. Old man at the general store just shook his head and said, "That place ain't right, mister. Ain't been right since my granddaddy's time." I figured it was just mountain superstition. Every wilderness area has its ghost stories. But when I drove my truck up the old logging road on March 3rd, 1977, I started to understand what he meant. The forest felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. I've been in hundreds of forests, and they all have their own personality. Some feel welcoming, some feel wild, some feel ancient. Hell Hollow felt like it was watching me. The trees were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just this heavy silence that pressed against my ears like I was deep underwater. Even the wind didn't make noise in the branches. I set up camp near the main cave entrance, a massive opening in the limestone cliff face that locals called the Devil's Mouth. The opening was bigger than a house, and when I shined my flashlight into it, the beam just disappeared into blackness. The air coming out smelled like wet rock and something else I couldn't identify, something old and sour. That first night, I sat by my campfire, writing in my journal and trying to ignore the feeling that something was staring at me from the trees. Every time I looked up, I saw nothing but shadows dancing in the firelight. But the feeling never went away. I called Martha's house on my radio that night, hoping Jenny might answer. She did, but when she heard my voice, she just said, "Mom, it's Dad," and handed over the phone. Martha was polite but cold, asking about my work like she was talking to a stranger. After I hung up, the silence in Hell Hollow seemed even deeper. I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep, but every little sound made me jump. A stick breaking in the distance, the soft whisper of wind through the cave mouth, something that might have been footsteps circling my camp, always staying just outside the ring of light from my dying fire. When morning came, I felt foolish. Daylight has a way of making night fears seem silly. I ate my breakfast, checked my equipment, and prepared to explore the first cave system. I was here to do a job, and I was damn well going to do it. The cave entrance was even more impressive in daylight. The limestone had been carved by thousands of years of water flow, creating smooth curves and strange formations. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd. The rock near the entrance showed tool marks, not natural erosion, but deliberate carving. I ran my fingers over the marks. They were old, really old, but unmistakably artificial. Someone had modified this cave entrance centuries ago, but the cuts were too precise for primitive tools, and the patterns were unlike anything I'd seen in Native American sites. I should have turned around right then, should have packed up my gear and driven back to town. But curiosity killed the cat, as my grandmother used to say, and I was about to find out just how true that saying could be. The first cave system took my breath away. Once I got past the entrance, my helmet light revealed a vast underground cathedral. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above me, and the walls were covered in limestone formations that looked almost like frozen waterfalls. But something was off about the acoustics. When I called out, "Hello," to test the echo, my voice came back wrong. It sounded like multiple people were calling back, from different directions, at slightly different times. The effect was so unsettling that I decided to work in silence. I spent the morning mapping the main chamber and taking rock samples. The limestone was unlike anything in my textbooks. It had an unusual mineral composition, almost like it had been chemically altered. I made notes to send samples to the lab when I got back to civilization. Around noon, I found the first skeleton. It was wedged into a crack in the cave wall, about 10 feet off the ground. At first, I thought it might be an animal that had crawled in there to die. But when I climbed up to investigate, I saw it was human. An adult, based on the size of the bones. What really disturbed me was the condition of the skeleton. The bones were completely white, polished, smooth, like they'd been cleaned with acid. And there wasn't a scrap of calcium left in them. When I touched the skull, it crumbled to powder in my hands. I'd never seen anything like it. Bones don't just lose their calcium like that, not naturally. It would take some kind of systematic extraction process, like what happens in certain diseases. But this looked deliberate. I took photos and made detailed notes. Maybe some kind of mineral-rich groundwater had leached the calcium out over many years. It was the only explanation that made sense. But then I found the second skeleton, and the third, and the fourth. They were all the same, all human, all completely drained of calcium, and all arranged in positions that didn't look natural. Arms folded precisely across chests. Leg bones lined up parallel. Skulls facing the same direction. Someone had positioned these bodies deliberately. I started to feel that crawling sensation between my shoulder blades, like someone was watching me. The cave suddenly felt much smaller, even though nothing had changed. My helmet light seemed dimmer, and the shadows seemed deeper. I decided to head back to camp and radio in my findings. This was bigger than a geological survey. This was a potential crime scene, even if the crimes had happened decades or centuries ago. But as I made my way toward the cave entrance, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Scratching, like fingernails on stone, but amplified through the cave system. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls and ceiling. A rhythmic scraping that reminded me of someone sharpening knives. I stopped walking and listened. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. "Is someone there?" My voice bounced back from multiple directions, distorted and strange. But underneath the echoes, I could swear I heard something else. A sound like whispering, too faint to make out words. I walked faster toward the entrance, my light beam dancing wildly as I moved. Behind me, the scratching started again. Closer this time, following me. I didn't quite run out of that cave, but it was close. Back at camp, I sat in the sunshine and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Caves make weird noises. Wind through stone passages can sound like almost anything. The human skeletons were probably old Native American burials, or maybe victims of some long ago accident. but my hands were shaking as I wrote up my report. That night, I set up my radio and tried to contact the ranger station. The transmission was full of static, and my supervisor's voice kept cutting in and out. "Survey going, Neil?" "Found some human remains," I said into the microphone. "Multiple skeletons. Might need to bring in archaeologists or..." "Can't hear you. A lot of interference." I said I found human bones in the first cave system. Check back in 72 hours. Stay safe. The radio went dead. I tried for another hour but couldn't raise anyone. The static was getting worse, filled with sounds that almost seemed like voices. But when I concentrated on them, they dissolved back into random noise. I made myself a simple dinner and tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, I found myself looking up from my book to scan the tree line. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Just after dark, I heard the scratching again. This time, it wasn't coming from the cave. It was coming from underneath my campsite. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear the scratching under my tent. Sometimes it sounded like one set of claws. Sometimes like dozens. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling and listening to something moving through the earth beneath me. When morning finally came, I crawled out of my tent to find that things had been moved around my campsite. My geological equipment was arranged in a perfect circle around my fire pit. My rock samples were lined up by size, smallest to largest. My notebooks were stacked in a neat pile, with the pages all turned to blank sheets. I hadn't done any of that. "I'm not a neat person," asked my ex-wife. "I leave things where I drop them." But someone had organized my entire camp while I slept. The really disturbing part was that I hadn't heard anyone moving around outside, just the scratching from below. I checked for footprints, but found none. The ground around my tent was undisturbed. Whatever had rearranged my stuff hadn't left any tracks. I decided to explore a different cave system that day, hoping to find some answers. Maybe the scratching was coming from some kind of underground animal. Bats, maybe, or a family of raccoons that had made a den in the limestone. The second cave was smaller than the first, but it went much deeper into the cliff face. My flashlight beam revealed a narrow passage that seemed to go on forever. I had to crawl on my hands and knees in some places, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for my shoulders. About 100 yards in, the passage opened into another chamber. This one was different from the cathedral-like space I'd found yesterday. The walls here were covered in markings. At first, I thought they might be natural formations. Limestone caves often have strange patterns where water has carved channels in most of the rock. But as I studied them more closely, I realized these were deliberate. Someone had carved symbols into the walls. The symbols weren't like any Native American petroglyphs I'd seen. They were more complex, almost like a written language. Some looked like stick figures, but with too many limbs. Others were geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. And scattered among the symbols were English letters. Leave. That was the first word I could make out, carved deep into the stone about eye level. Below it, go back. And lower down, in fresher-looking carving, last warning. Someone had been in this cave recently. Someone who knew I was here. I started taking photos of the symbols, but my camera flash seemed to make the carvings move. That was impossible, of course. Stone doesn't move. But in the brief millisecond of white light, the stick figures seemed to twist and writhe on the walls. That's when I noticed the sound. A low humming, almost below the range of hearing. It seemed to come from deeper in the cave, past this chamber. The humming had a rhythm to it, like a heartbeat or slow breathing. I followed the sound deeper into the cave system. The passages here were clearly artificial. The walls were too straight, the ceiling too uniform. Someone had carved living spaces out of solid rock. And then I found the first tools. They were lying on a natural shelf in the rock, arranged like a surgeon's instruments. But they were made from human bones. Arm bones sharpened to points, rib cages fashioned into baskets, a skull that had been hollowed out and fitted with a handle, turned into some kind of scoop. The bone tools were old but well maintained. Someone was still using them. I was photographing the tools when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the direction I'd entered. But these didn't sound like boots on stone. They sounded softer, like bare feet. Bare feet with too many toes. I turned around, my light beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello? Who's there?" The footsteps stopped, but in the silence that followed, I could hear breathing. Slow, deep breaths, like something large was waiting just outside my circle of light. "I know you're there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can hear you breathing." The breathing stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the absolute silence of deep stone. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Then, from somewhere in the darkness ahead of me, came a voice. Dr. Ashford. It knew my name. The voice was human but wrong somehow, like someone who had learned to speak by listening through walls. The pronunciation was perfect, but there was no emotion in it at all. "Who are you?" I whispered. "You have been chosen," the voice said. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing through passages I couldn't. "You see, special honor. You will join the deep community." I started backing toward the cave entrance, keeping my light pointed ahead of me. "I don't understand. Who's there? Show yourself." "Surface dwellers have forgotten the old agreements." The voice continued. "Your kind may look but not disturb. You have disturbed." I could hear movement now, rustling sounds from the darkness beyond my light. Not one thing moving, but several. Maybe dozens. "I'm just doing a geological survey," I said, still backing up. "I didn't mean to disturb anything." "Dr. Ashford teaches us much about surface technology," the voice said, and now there was something that might have been amusement in it. "We learn quickly from thinking food." That's when I ran. I scrambled through those narrow passages, faster than I'd ever moved in my life, scraping my knees and elbows on the stone walls. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running like I was, but moving with the steady confidence of things that knew these tunnels better than I knew my own house. I burst out of the cave entrance and into daylight, gasping and shaking. But even in the sunshine, I didn't feel safe. I could still hear that voice echoing in my head, thinking food. They weren't just living down there. They were hunting. I should have left Hell Hollow that day. Should have packed my truck and driven straight to the nearest police station. Instead, I did what any good geologist would do. I tried to find a rational explanation for what I'd experienced. Maybe I'd suffered some kind of breakdown. The divorce, the estrangement from Jenny, the stress of working alone in an isolated place, TV, it could have triggered hallucinations. The voice in the cave could have been my own subconscious mind working through guilt and loneliness. That's what I told myself as I sat in my tent that evening, writing letters to Martha and Jenny. Letters I'd never send. But putting my thoughts on paper helped calm my nerves. Asterisk. "Dear Martha," asterisk I wrote. Asterisk. "If something happens to me, don't let Jenny come looking. This place changes people." Asterisk. But as I wrote, I realized that wasn't quite right. Hell Hollow wasn't changing me. It was revealing something that had always been here, hidden in the deep, dark places where sunlight never reached. I'd brought my camera back to camp and spent the afternoon reviewing the photos I'd taken in the caves. The pictures of the bone tools were clear enough, but the shots of the wall symbols were strange. In several photos, the stick figures appeared to be in different positions than when I'd taken the pictures. Arms raised instead of lowered. Heads turned to face the camera instead of looking away. Photos don't lie. But apparently, they could be changed after the fact. That night, I set up my radio and tried again to contact the ranger station. This time, the static was so bad I could barely make out individual words. But I kept trying because I was starting to understand that I might not leave Hell Hollow alive. Finally, around midnight, I managed to get through. "Base, this is Dr. Ashford," I said into the microphone. "Emergency situation. I need immediate evacuation from Hell Hollow." "Neil?" The voice was faint but clear. "My supervisor, Tom Bradley." "What's your status?" "They're not animals, Tom. They have cities down here. Thousands of them." "Neil, you're breaking up." "Say again?" "They've been taking people for generations. Breeding programs. Making us more nutritious." "Neil, I'm not reading you clearly. Are you injured?" I looked around my campsite. Everything was wrong. My equipment had been rearranged again, but this time it wasn't in neat piles. My geological samples were gone. My spare batteries were missing. All my calcium supplements, the ones I took for bone health, had disappeared. Tom, listen carefully, I said into the radio. Tell my daughter I love her, and whatever you do, don't send anyone to look for me. These things, they're not just hunting randomly. They're farming us. Neil, you need to calm down. I'm sending a team. That's when I saw them. They came out of the cave mouth like pale ghosts, moving with the fluid grace of things that had never known sunlight. At first glance, they looked almost human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where it should be. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past their knees. And they were white as cave fish, so pale they seemed to glow in the darkness. Their faces were the worst part. Human-like but simplified, as if someone had tried to carve a person from memory and gotten the details wrong. No hair, no eyebrows, eyes that reflected my firelight like an animal's. Tom, I whispered into the radio, they're here. They're all around my camp. Doctor, Ashford joins the deep community now, said the voice I'd heard in the cave. But this time it came from one of the creatures standing at the edge of my campsite. Its mouth moved wrong when it spoke, like it was remembering how human lips were supposed to work. Surface dwellers stay away or face harvest, another one said. Its voice was identical to the first, as if they'd all learned to speak from the same teacher. I counted at least a dozen of them, standing just outside my circle of firelight. They didn't seem to be in any hurry. They just watched me with those terrible empty eyes, waiting for something. What do you want? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. You have learned too much, the first creature said. Knowledge brings responsibility. You will help us understand surface world. Teach us better ways to farm your kind. I won't help you hurt people. Dr. Ashford has no choice, it replied. And then it smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. But first, you donate calcium, for the good of the deep community. They started moving toward me then, and I realized that my fire was the only thing keeping them at bay. They stayed just outside the ring of light, circling my camp like wolves around a wounded deer. I grabbed a burning branch from my fire and held it in front of me like a torch. The creatures stopped moving, but they didn't retreat. Fire dies, one of them observed. Dr. Ashford comes with us when fire dies. I looked at my dwindling pile of firewood, maybe enough to last until dawn, if I was careful. But dawn was hours away, and I wasn't sure sunlight would save me anyway. That's when I noticed something else missing from my camp. My radio. They'd taken it while I was distracted by their approach. The static I'd been hearing for days hadn't been interference. It had been them, listening to my transmissions, learning about the outside world. Tom? I called out, hoping my supervisor was still listening somehow. If you can hear me, stay away from Hell Hollow. They've got technology down there. They've been watching us, learning from us, and they're ready to expand their hunting grounds. The creatures laughed at that, a sound like wind through broken stone. Surface dwellers so frightened, one said. But doctor, Ashford helps us reach surface world, teaches us better hunting, better farming, better calcium extraction. They started showing me their tools then. The bone instruments I'd seen in the cave, but also things made from metal. My missing equipment, modified and sharpened. They'd been studying human technology, learning to improve their hunting methods. I realized then that I wasn't just a victim, I was a resource. They wanted my knowledge of the surface world, my understanding of human behavior and technology. They'd been planning this for a long time. My fire was starting to die. I'm writing this by the last light of my dying fire. The creatures are still out there, waiting in the darkness. They know they don't have to rush. Time is on their side. But I've figured out something they don't know I know. The reason they've been able to stay hidden for so long, the reason no one believes the stories about Hell Hollow, is that they've had help from above ground. The quick response from federal authorities, the classification of my research, the way this whole area got declared off-limits. Someone in the government knows about them. I found the evidence in my tent tonight while I was looking for anything that might help me survive until dawn. A letter that wasn't there before, written on government letterhead, *Doctor. Ashford has been chosen for special honor. Cooperation with deep community is expected. Resistance serves no purpose. Integration will be swift and efficient. *. They've been doing this for decades. Maybe longer. taking people who get too close to the truth and making them disappear. The official cause of death, always the same: accidental drowning in underground rivers. But I'm not going, quietly. I've hidden copies of my journal and letters around the campsite, in places where search teams might find them. I've buried detailed notes about the cave systems, the symbols on the walls, the bone tools, and everything I've learned about their society. Someone needs to know the truth. The creatures are getting restless now. I can see them pacing back and forth just beyond my light, their pale shapes moving like smoke through the trees. They're making soft clicking sounds with their teeth, a noise that reminds me of insects. Dr. Ashford's fire dies soon, one of them calls out. Then Dr. Ashford comes home with us. Deep community welcomes new teacher. My flame is just a flicker now. Maybe 5 minutes left, maybe less. But I'm not done fighting. I've been saving the battery from my radio, the one they didn't know I had removed earlier. It's got enough charge for one last transmission, one final message to the outside world. Even if they jam it, even if no one believes it, I have to try. This is Dr. Cornelius Ashford. I speak into the darkness, hoping someone, somewhere, is listening. If you find this recording, stay away from Hell Hollow. The creatures living in the deep cave systems are real, and they're not just animals. They have intelligence, technology, and a systematic approach to hunting humans. The clicking sounds are getting louder. They know what I'm doing. They've been taking people for generations, possibly centuries. They farm us for calcium, keeping prisoners alive while slowly extracting minerals from our bones. But they're evolving, learning from their victims. They want to expand their operations to the surface world. Something moves in my peripheral vision. One of them has gotten closer to my dying fire, and someone in the federal government knows about them. Someone's been covering this up, making people disappear, keeping the truth buried. Check the classified files for Project Limestone Garden. Find out who's been protecting these things. My fire gutters and almost dies. In the sudden dimness, I can see dozens of pale shapes surrounding me. Maybe hundreds. How many of them are down there in the deep places? Tell my daughter I'm sorry, I whisper into the radio. Tell her I love her, and tell her to stay away from caves. Tell everyone to stay away from... The fire dies. In the absolute darkness that follows, I hear them moving. Soft footsteps on stone and earth. The whisper of air through hollow bones, the gentle scraping of filed teeth against each other. They're all around me now. Welcome home, Doctor. Ashford, says the voice from the cave. Deep community has been waiting for you. We have so much to learn from each other. I don't scream when they take me. There's no point. No one would hear anyway. But if you're reading this, if someone finds these letters and this journal, then maybe my death won't be for nothing. Maybe someone will believe. Maybe. Someone will stop them before they bring their hunting methods to the surface world. The truth is buried here in Hell Hollow, in the deep dark places where the sun never shines. But truth has a way of finding the light, even after the people who discovered it are gone. Remember my name, Dr. Cornelius Ashford. Remember what happened here. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you it was just an accident. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but some truths are too important to die. This journal was found by Kentucky State Police on the 2nd of April 1977, along with Dr. Ashford's abandoned campsite. All materials related to the case were subsequently classified by federal authorities. The Hell Hollow area remains permanently closed to public access. My name is Jeremiah Blackwater, but everyone calls me Rome. I've been a park ranger for 31 years now, and this is my last assignment before I retire. At 58 years old, I'm looking forward to spending my days fishing instead of hiking through the woods with a heavy pack. They sent me to Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, to a place called Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. It's a special area within the forest called Elder Grove. 4,000 acres of old-growth trees that have been standing for over 400 years. These trees are massive, some of them wider than a small house. When you walk among them, it feels like being inside a cathedral made of wood and leaves. I'm here to do what I've always done, protect the forest and keep an eye on things. But Elder Grove is different from other places I've worked. The Cherokee people who lived here long ago considered it sacred. My grandfather was part Cherokee, and he used to tell me stories about places where the spirit world touched our world. I never paid much attention to those stories until I came here. It's November 1994, and most of the leaves have fallen. Without all that green covering everything, you can see the shapes the trees make against the sky. Sometimes those shapes look strange, like they form patterns that make your eyes hurt if you stare too long. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and there's no phone service out here. When something happens in Elder Grove, you're completely on your own. That should have bothered me more than it did. After 31 years of dealing with lost hikers, bear encounters, and the occasional poacher, I thought I'd seen everything the forest could throw at me. I was wrong. My first week was quiet. I set up my temporary station in a clearing near the center of the grove. The Park Service gave me a small trailer with basic supplies and a radio that barely worked. Most days, I walked the trails, checking for damage from the recent storms and making sure the few hikers who came through were staying safe. The trees here are something special. Yellow poplars mostly, some of them 20 feet around. They reach up so high you can't see their tops. Walking among them makes you feel small, like a child in a world built for giants. The forest floor is soft, with centuries of fallen leaves, and it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. But even in that first week, I noticed small things that weren't quite right. My compass would point in different directions depending on where I stood. I thought it was broken, so I brought out my backup. Same thing. Both compasses would spin slowly when I got near the center of the grove, like they couldn't decide which way was north. The shadows were wrong too. I've spent my whole life in forests, and I know how shadows should fall. But here, sometimes shadows pointed up toward the sky instead of down toward the ground. Not all of them, just a few. Just enough to make you do a double take and wonder if you were seeing things. I started keeping notes in my logbook, writing down these little oddities. Nothing dramatic, nothing that couldn't be explained. Maybe the compass problem was caused by mineral deposits underground. Maybe the shadow thing was just tricks of light filtering through the canopy in unusual ways. But the feeling was there from the beginning, the feeling that the forest was watching me. That sounds crazy, I know, but any ranger who spent time in real wilderness knows what I mean. Sometimes you feel like you're being observed, usually by a deer or a bear keeping an eye on the human walking through their territory. This was different. This felt like the trees themselves were watching. I tried to shake it off. After 3 decades in the woods, I thought I was past getting spooked by strange noises and feelings. I told myself it was just because Elder Grove was so isolated, so different from anywhere else I'd worked. The trees, they were older here, bigger, more mysterious. It made sense that the place would feel different. On my 7th day, I found the first hiker. She was sitting on a fallen log about a mile from my station, staring up at the canopy with a confused expression on her face. At first, I thought she was just resting, maybe taking a break from hiking. But as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. The woman looked to be about 70 years old, with white hair and deeply wrinkled skin. She was wearing a bright yellow backpack and new hiking boots, the kind young people buy for weekend adventures. But her hands were spotted with age, and her face had the kind of lines that take decades to form. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I asked, approaching slowly. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were the most confused I'd ever seen. I don't understand," she said in a voice that cracked with age. "I was just here for the day. I'm 25. I'm supposed to meet my boyfriend at the parking lot at 5. I checked my watch. It was almost 6 in the evening. "How long have you been sitting here?" I asked. "A few minutes," she said. "Maybe an hour?" "I don't. The time feels strange here. The trees keep growing, but it happens so fast. I watched that branch sprout new leaves while I was sitting here, but it's November. Trees don't grow leaves in November." I looked where she was pointing. The branch looked normal to me, covered in the brown bark of a tree that had lost its leaves for winter. But her expression was so sincere, so frightened, that I felt a chill run down my spine. "What's your name?" I asked. "Sarah. Sarah Chen. I drove up from Knoxville this morning. I'm meeting David at 5. She checked her own watch and gasped. "This says it's 6:15, but that can't be right. I've only been here for a little while." I helped Sarah back to the parking lot, where we found a car with Tennessee plates and a worried young man pacing beside. The man, David, ran toward us as soon as he saw us coming out of the forest. "Sarah, thank God, I was about to call the rangers. You've been gone for 8 hours." Sarah looked at David, then at her reflection in the car window. She screamed. It was a sound I'll never forget, full of terror and confusion. She touched her face, her white hair, staring at her aged reflection like she was seeing a ghost. "This isn't me," she whispered. "This isn't my face." David stepped back, his own face pale with shock. "Sarah, what happened to you? You look like. Like I'm old," she finished. "But I'm not. I'm 25. I was 25 this morning. I radioed for medical assistance and stayed with them until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics were as confused as the rest of us. Sarah's ID said she was born in 1969, which would make her 25. But every medical test they could do on the spot, checking her pulse, her blood pressure, her reflexes, indicated she had the body of someone at least 70 years old. They took her to the hospital in Knoxville. I never found out what the doctors there concluded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Sarah had said, that she watched a tree branch grow new leaves in November. I'd been in the forest when she came out, and I hadn't seen anything unusual. But her terror was real. Her aged appearance was real. I started carrying a camera with me on my rounds. If something strange was happening in Elder Grove, I wanted evidence. The camera didn't work the way it should have. Every photo I took came out wrong. Not blurry or overexposed, wrong in ways that didn't make sense. Pictures of normal forest paths showed twisted trees that weren't there when I looked with my eyes. Photos of clearings showed stone structures covered in symbols I didn't recognize. One picture I took of my own boots showed the ground beneath them as a swirling void of stars and darkness. I developed the film at my station using a small darkroom kit I'd brought for documenting wildlife. Every single photo showed a version of the forest that I'd never seen. A forest where the trees grew in impossible spirals, where geometric patterns covered every surface, where the sky was filled with colors that don't have names. But when I looked at these same locations with my eyes, I saw normal forest, old trees, fallen logs, patches of sunlight filtering through the canopy. 2 days later, I found the second hiker. This time, it was a man in his 30s, sitting in the same spot where I'd found Sarah. He had the same confused expression, the same aged appearance. According to his driver's license, he was 32 years old. According to his body, he was pushing 80. "I was just here for an hour," he told me, his voice shaky with age and confusion. "I wanted to see the big trees. My wife packed me a lunch." He held up a brown paper bag. "The sandwich is still fresh. But my hands, to look at my hands." His hands were spotted and wrinkled, the hands of someone who had lived a full lifetime. The sandwich in the bag looked like it had been made that morning. That's when I realized Elder Grove was doing something to people. Something that aged their bodies while leaving their minds confused and lost in time that didn't match reality. And if it was happening to hikers, what was it doing to me? I should have called for backup then. Should have contacted my supervisor and recommended that Elder Grove be closed to the public until someone could figure out what was happening. But I didn't. Part of it was pride. I'd been handling difficult situations in the wilderness for 3 decades, and I wasn't about to admit that some trees were too much for me to handle. But if I'm being honest, the bigger part was curiosity. Something impossible was happening in this forest, and I wanted to understand it. That decision almost killed me. The strange events started happening faster after I found the second aged hiker. My compass stopped working entirely, spinning wildly no matter where I stood. The shadows began moving on their own, shifting and changing, even when the sun stayed in the same position. Time became unreliable. Time show light of beat 2 hour home. My watch would run backward for hours, then suddenly jump forward. I started seeing things that shouldn't exist. Trees growing through solid rock like the stone was made of air. Deer walking upside down on the underside of tree branches, grazing on leaves that grew downward. Birds that flew in perfect geometric patterns, tracing symbols in the air that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. The worst part was that I was starting to understand it all. Not with my brain, but with some deeper part of myself that remembered my grandfather's stories about places where the spirit world touched ours. The Cherokee had known about Elder Grove. They'd known it was different, dangerous, sacred. They'd known to stay away, except for the most important ceremonies. On my 10th day, I found something that made me understand why. I was hiking the Eastern Trail when I came across a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Between the stones, the air seemed thick and wavy, like heat rising from summer pavement. As I got closer, I started to hear voices. Quiet at first, then getting louder. They were speaking in a language I didn't recognize. But somehow I understood what they were saying. They were Cherokee voices from hundreds of years ago, conducting a ceremony to keep something contained. The forest mind must not wake, they chanted. The boundary must hold, the old ones must sleep. I could see them then, like ghosts or memories made visible. Cherokee men and women in traditional clothing, dancing around the stone's circle, keeping something at bay through the power of their ritual and their faith. But as I watched, their images began to fade. The voices became quieter, the ceremony was ending, and whatever they had been holding back was starting to stir. That's when I felt it for the first time. The presence of something vast and ancient and utterly alien. Something that existed in the spaces between normal reality. Something that could reshape the world just by thinking about it. The forest mind was waking up. I ran back to my station, but running in Elder Grove wasn't like running anywhere else. Sometimes the path ahead of me would stretch out like a rubber band, making 100-yard distance feel like miles. Other times, I'd take a single step and find myself half a mile from where I started. The forest was playing with space and time, bending reality like it was made of clay. When I finally reached my trailer, I tried to radio for help. The radio crackled, with static. But underneath the noise, I could hear something else. A sound like breathing, slow and deep, like something the size of a mountain taking its time with each breath. That night, I had the first dream. I was standing in the forest, but it wasn't the Elder Grove I knew. The trees were enormous, big enough to hold cities in their branches. Their roots extended deep into the earth, connecting to a vast network that spanned continents. I could see the whole planet from above, and I understood that what I thought of as separate forests were actually parts of one huge organism that had been growing here since before humans existed. The forest mind spoke to me in that dream, not with words, but with pure understanding flowing directly into my thoughts. "I have been waiting," it said. "The barriers grow weak, the old agreements fade. I need someone to speak for me to the new world." I woke up knowing that I hadn't been assigned to Elder Grove by chance. Something in my Cherokee blood, some genetic memory or spiritual connection, made me compatible with whatever was awakening here. The forest mind had been influencing events to bring me here, to this place, at this time. The aged hikers weren't random victims, they were test subjects. The forest mind was learning how human bodies worked, how human consciousness functioned, preparing for some kind of merger or transformation, and I was going to be its partner in that process. Over the next few days, the boundaries between dream and waking life began to blur. I'd be walking the trails during the day, and suddenly find myself experiencing memories that weren't mine. The growth of these trees over centuries, the migrations of animals across thousands of years, the rise and fall of ice ages and climate changes. I began to understand that the Cherokee ceremonies hadn't been about keeping the forest mind asleep. They had been about maintaining a delicate balance, allowing it to remain aware, while preventing it from expanding its influence beyond the boundaries of Elder Grove. But human civilization had changed the rules. Radio waves, electrical signals, the constant electromagnetic noise of modern life, all of it was disrupting the old barriers. The forest mind was no longer contained, and it was starting to reach out into the wider world. I found evidence of this when I discovered what had happened to the other hikers who had disappeared over the years. They hadn't aged rapidly like Sarah and the man I'd found. They had become something else entirely. Their remains were scattered throughout the grove, but they weren't decaying the way bodies should. Instead, they were becoming part of the forest. I found a skeleton with tree roots growing through the rib cage, tiny saplings sprouting from the skull. Another body had become completely integrated with a massive oak tree, the bones visible inside the bark like fossils in stone. The forest mind was learning. From each person it absorbed, growing more complex, more capable of understanding human thoughts and desires. Soon it would be ready to make contact with the outside world, and I was its chosen ambassador. On my 20th day in Elder Grove, everything changed. I woke up that morning and immediately knew something was different. The air felt thick and electric, like the moments before a thunderstorm. But there were no clouds in the sky, and the weather forecast called for clear skies all week. The animals were gone. I realized this as I walked my morning rounds. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The forest was completely silent, except for the sound of my own footsteps on the carpet of fallen leaves. That's when I started seeing them. Figures moving between the trees, always just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. But I could feel them watching me, following me, staying just out of sight. I made my way to the stone circle where I'd first heard the Cherokee voices. The circle was still there, but the stones were different now. They were taller, more elaborate, covered in symbols that seemed to move and change as I watched them. And in the center of the circle, the air wasn't just wavy anymore. It was open. A doorway hung in empty air, showing glimpses of somewhere else. Not another place on Earth, but another reality entirely. Through the opening, I could see landscapes that followed different rules. Forests where the trees grew downward into an infinite sky. Oceans that flowed uphill, mountains that existed in impossible spirals. And coming through that doorway, slowly and carefully, was something that I can only describe as hunger given form. It wasn't a creature exactly. It was more like a living void, a piece of emptiness that moved with purpose. Wherever it touched, reality started to unravel. Trees aged and died and crumbled to dust in seconds. The ground itself began to dissolve, revealing the same star-filled void I'd seen in my photographs. I understood then what the Cherokee ceremonies had really been about. They weren't just maintaining balance with the forest mind. They were keeping these things out. These reality eaters, these cosmic predators that consumed entire worlds by simply existing in them. The forest mind had been Earth's guardian all this time, using places like Elder Grove as monitoring stations, watching for signs that the barriers between dimensions were weakening. And now those barriers were failing. "Help me," the forest mind said, speaking directly into my thoughts with an urgency I'd never heard before. "I cannot fight them alone. I need a human consciousness to bridge the gap between realities. I need someone who can help me coordinate the defense of this world." I could feel other consciousness now, vast intelligences spread across the planet wherever there were old forests, ancient trees, that had been growing long enough to become part of the network. They were all connected, all part of a global defense system that most humans never knew existed. But the system was failing. Too many old forests had been cut down, too many sacred groves had been paved over. The network was weakening, and the cosmic predators were taking advantage. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Let me in," the forest mind replied. "Let me merge with your consciousness, become my eyes and hands in the human world. Help me save your species and mine." I looked at the growing tear in reality, at the things pushing through from the other side. More of them now, each one eating away at the foundation of existence itself. I thought about Sarah and the other hiker, aged decades and hours. I thought about the bodies I'd found becoming part of the trees. I thought about my grandfather's stories about the places where two worlds touched, and the responsibility that came with standing at those boundaries. "Will I still be me?" I asked. "You will be more than you," the forest mind answered. "You will be yourself, and you will be us. And you will be the guardian of realities that most minds cannot imagine." The cosmic predators were spreading out from the stone circle now, and reality was collapsing faster. I could see the effect spreading beyond Elder Grove, advancing toward the towns and cities where millions of people lived their lives without knowing that existence itself was under attack. I closed my eyes and opened my mind. The merger happened all at once, like being struck by lightning made of pure knowledge. Suddenly I could feel every tree in Elder Grove, every root, every leaf, every ring of growth that marked the passage of seasons. But more than that, I could feel forests around the world, ancient groves on every continent, all connected in a vast network of consciousness that had been protecting Earth for millions of years. Through that network, I could see the cosmic predators for what they really were. They weren't evil exactly, just incompatible with our kind of reality. They consumed ordered existence and left behind chaos, not out of malice but because it was their nature. And I could see how to fight them. Working together, the forest mind and I began to weave new barriers, using the geometric patterns I'd seen in my photographs as templates. We drew on the life force of every connected tree, every underground network of roots, every sacred grove where humans had once performed ceremonies to maintain the balance. The fight was happening in multiple dimensions at once, with weapons made of thought and will and the fundamental forces that hold reality together. I could feel myself stretching across space and time, existing in dozens of places simultaneously, coordinating a defense that spanned the entire planet. Gradually, slowly, we began to push the invaders back. The cosmic predators retreated through their dimensional doorway, and I helped the forest mind seal the opening. But I could feel their attention still focused on our reality, probing for other weak points, other ways to break through. The immediate crisis was over, but the war was just beginning. When the merger was complete, I found myself sitting in the stone circle, still in my ranger uniform, still recognizably human. But I was also something more now. I could feel the vast network of consciousness that connected every major forest on Earth, and I understood my role in it. I walked back to my station and wrote my final report to the Park Service. I told them that Elder Grove was safe for visitors again, that the unusual incidents had been resolved. I didn't mention the cosmic predators or the forest mind or the fact that I was no longer entirely human. Some things are too big for paperwork. I kept my job as a ranger because the world needs people who can stand guard at the boundaries between realities. To visitors, I'm just Jeremiah Blackwater, an old-timer who knows the forest better than anyone. They don't need to know that I'm also the early warning system for dimensional invasions, or that the trees around them are part of a planetary defense network. Most of the time, I'm still just Rome. I still enjoy hiking through the woods, still help lost tourists find their way back to the parking lot, still dream about retirement and fishing. But part of me is always aware of the larger picture, always monitoring the barriers that keep our reality stable. The aged hikers were the last casualties. Whatever was causing people to lose decades of their lives stopped happening after the merger. Sarah Chen and the other victims never got their youth back, but they're safe now. Sometimes that has to be enough. I've been guarding Elder Grove for 6 months now, and I plan to keep doing it for as long as necessary. The forest mind tells me that could be a very long time, centuries, maybe millennia. Trees have a different relationship with time than humans do. But that's okay. I've got a good job, meaningful work, and the most beautiful office in the world. And on quiet evenings, when the forest is peaceful and the barriers between realities are strong, I can still hear my grandfather's voice in the wind, telling me stories about the places where two worlds touch. He'd be proud to know that someone in our family is helping to keep the balance. The cosmic predators are still out there, still looking for ways to break through. But they'll have to get past every forest on Earth first, and every ranger who's learned to see beyond the surface of things. We're watching, we're ready, and we'll keep the boundaries safe for as long as trees grow toward the light. My name is Ezra Holloway, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 16 years. I've seen bears tear through campsites, found hikers who got lost for days, and pulled bodies out of rivers. But nothing in all my years prepared me for what I found in September of 1967, deep in the Cataract Falls backcountry. I was 43 then, old enough to know the mountains like the back of my hand, young enough to handle 10 days alone in the wilderness. The Park Service sent me out to investigate what they called unusual predator activity near Howling Creek. 7 campers had died in 6 weeks. The bodies were found in places that made no sense, 30 feet up in trees, buried in solid rock, scattered across cliff tops with no way to climb up. The morning I headed out, thick fog hung in the hollows like dirty cotton. My supervisor, Jim Bradley, looked worried as he watched me load my pack. "You sure you want to do this alone, Ezra?" he asked, adjusting his. "We could wait for backup from Knoxville." I shook my head. Backup's 50 miles away through roadless terrain. Whatever's killing people out there, it needs to be stopped now. Hunting season starts in 2 weeks. Jim knew about my time in Vietnam. He knew about the injury I got over there. Shrapnel that left me with gaps in my memory sometimes, moments where I'd lose track of time. But he also knew I was the best tracker in the service. If something was hunting people in these mountains, I'd find it. The Cherokee called this area Kitawa, a word that meant wolf spirits who could steal human thoughts. The old-timers around here still told stories about them, especially when the fog rolled in thick like today. I didn't put much stock in ghost stories, but I respected the mountains enough to listen. My first day took me 12 miles into the back country, following Howling Creek through narrow hollows thick with laurel. The silence bothered me. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed quiet. After 16 years of mountain sounds, you notice when they stop. I made camp near where they found the first body, a college kid from Nashville who'd been hunting alone. According to the report, something had torn him apart and arranged the pieces in a perfect circle. The local sheriff called it a bear attack, but I'd seen bear kills. This was something else. That first night, I heard howling in the distance. Deep, long calls that echoed off the ridges. But the sound seemed wrong somehow. Too intelligent, too organized. Like the animals were talking to each other about something important. I wrote everything down in my journal, same as always. Time, weather, observations. It helped keep my mind focused when the injury acted up. The doctor said I might always have problems with memory gaps, but writing things down helped me keep track. Around midnight, the howling stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I dozed fitfully in my sleeping bag, waking every hour to check the fire. Something was watching me from the tree line. I could feel eyes on my back, patient and hungry. When morning came, I found tracks around my campsite. Huge paw prints, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. But here and there, mixed in with the paw prints, were what looked like human footprints. Boot prints, actually, like someone wearing hiking boots had walked alongside the animal. I photographed everything, measured the tracks, made detailed notes. The paw prints were 6 inches long, with claw marks that gouged deep into the soft earth. But the strangest thing was how they seemed to change. In one spot, clear paw prints. 10 feet later, something that looked half human, half animal. Then back to paws again. I'd been a hunting guide before joining the Park Service. I knew animal tracks like most people knew letters of the alphabet. These tracks told a story, but it was written in a language I didn't understand. The fog lifted around noon, and I got my first clear view of the hollow. Ancient oaks and maples rose like cathedral pillars, their canopies so thick that even noon sunshine barely reached the forest floor. Howling Creek ran swift and dark between moss-covered rocks. Beautiful country, but something about it felt wrong now. Diseased, maybe. Like the land itself was infected with whatever had been killing people. I pressed deeper into the backcountry, following the creek upstream toward Cataract Falls. According to my map, the next victim, a family of 3 from Georgia, had been found about 5 miles ahead. I needed to see that site before dark. The silence followed me all day. No bird songs, no rustling in the underbrush. Just the sound of my boots on dead leaves and the constant murmur of the creek. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen. Once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. But when I turned around, the forest was empty. By late afternoon, I'd covered 8 miles without seeing so much as a squirrel. The wrongness I'd felt that morning was getting stronger. This wasn't natural. Something had scared all the wildlife away from a huge area. Something big enough and dangerous enough to clear out everything with fur, feathers, or wings. I made my second camp in a small clearing near where Howling Creek bent sharply east. The spot felt defensible, open ground with good sight lines, the creek at my back. I built a large fire and cooked beans and coffee, trying to act normal. But my rifle stayed within arm's reach, and I kept catching myself looking over my shoulder. That's when I found the first note. It was tucked under a rock near my fire pit, written in my own handwriting on Park Service paper. Asterisk, Day 3. Spoke with pack leader again. Agreement still stands. Memory gaps getting worse, but worth it for what he's teaching me. Don't trust the radio reports. 7 victims so far, but there will be more, have to be more. Asterisk, I stared at that note for 10 minutes, reading it over and over. My handwriting, my paper, my pen. but I had no memory of writing it. And what did day 3 mean? This was only my second day in the backcountry. The injury from Vietnam sometimes caused blackouts, moments where I'd lose time. But never anything like this. I'd never forgotten writing something down, especially something this important, this disturbing. I checked my journal. According to my notes, I'd hiked into the backcountry yesterday morning. But the note was dated 3 days ago. Either someone was playing an elaborate trick on me, or I'd lost 2 days completely. The howling started again as darkness fell, closer this time. Much closer. And for the first time in 16 years of mountain work, I was genuinely afraid. I woke up the next morning with dirt under my fingernails and blood on my shirt. My fire had burned down to cold ashes, and my rifle was lying 10 feet away from where I'd left it. I had no memory of moving it, no memory of leaving my sleeping bag, no memory of whatever had happened during the night. But the evidence was right there in front of me. A rabbit carcass, half-eaten and still warm, lying beside my pack. Fresh deer blood on my hands and face. And tracks in the soft earth around my campsite, not just the huge paw prints from before, but my own boot prints, walking in circles for what must have been hours. I found more notes tucked in my pack, written in my handwriting. Asterisk, joined them for the hunt. Incredible experience. Senses sharper than ever before. Can smell fear from 100 yards away. Pack leader says I'm learning fast. Asterisk, human memories fading, but wolf memories getting stronger. Remember hunting deer through these same hollows 50 years ago. Wait, that's not my memory. Getting confused. Asterisk, he's helping with the injury. Brain feels clearer during hunts. Maybe this is better than being human. Asterisk, I stared at those notes until my eyes watered, but I couldn't remember writing a single word. The handwriting was definitely mine. I could see the way I made my R's, the slant of my Y's, but the thoughts weren't mine. These weren't thoughts I'd ever had. Panic started building in my chest. I'd lost time before, sure, but never like this. Never whole nights. Never with evidence that I'd been doing things I couldn't remember. I radioed back to headquarters, but got only static. According to my equipment, I should have been able to reach the ranger station easily from here. Something was interfering with the signal. That's when I noticed my food supplies. Yesterday, I'd been down to 2 cans of beans and some jerky. Now my pack was full of fresh meat, rabbit, squirrel, something that might have been deer liver. Raw meat, still bloody, wrapped in my own spare shirts. I'd been hunting and eating raw meat during my blackouts. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was happening to me, it was getting worse. The entity, whatever it was, wasn't just watching me anymore. It was influencing me, changing me. I broke camp fast and headed upstream, trying to put distance between myself and whatever had happened during the night. But every few 100 yards, I'd find signs that I'd been there before. A broken branch that I might have snapped. Boot prints that looked like mine, small caches of meat hidden under rocks. How long had I been out here? My journal said 2 days, but the evidence suggested much longer. I found a total of 17 notes hidden around my gear, all in my handwriting, describing weeks of contact with something called the pack leader. According to my own notes, I'd been learning to hunt like a wolf, learning to track prey by scent, to move silently through heavy brush, to kill quickly and efficiently. The notes described stalking other humans, studying their habits, preparing them for something called the hunt. But I couldn't remember any of it. Around noon, I reached the site where the Georgia family had died. The official report said they'd been camping near the creek when something attacked their tent. Mother, father, and 8-year-old daughter found scattered over a quarter-mile area. What the report didn't mention was the pattern. The bodies had been arranged in a triangle, exactly 47 paces between each point. I paced it off twice, to be sure. The father at one point, mother at another, little girl at the third. In the center of the triangle, someone had built a fire pit and roasted meat. Human meat, judging by the bone fragments I found in the ashes. The family had been hunted, killed, and consumed in a ritual pattern. This wasn't animal behavior. This was something that understood symbols, geometry, ceremony. I was photographing the scene when I heard it, footsteps in, the dry leaves behind me. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped when I stopped, started when I started walking. Something was following me, matching my pace exactly. I spun around, rifle ready, but saw nothing. Just trees and shadows and the endless silence that seemed to follow me everywhere now. But I could feel eyes watching me, patient and intelligent. "I know you're there," I called out. "Whatever you are, I know you're watching me." The forest stayed quiet, but in that silence, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My own voice, coming from somewhere in the trees, repeating my words back to me like an echo. "Whatever you are, I know you're watching me." Except the voice came from 3 different directions at once. I ran. For the first time in 16 years of mountain work, I dropped everything and ran like my life depended on it. Behind me, I could hear laughter. Not human laughter, but something close enough to make it worse. The sound followed me through the trees, always just behind me, never getting closer but never falling behind. I ran for maybe a mile before my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath beside the creek, I realized I wasn't alone. A man was sitting on a fallen log about 20 feet away, watching me with pale yellow eyes. He looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, blue jeans, work boots, except for those eyes and the way he didn't seem to be breathing. "You run pretty good for someone with a head injury," he said, and his voice was exactly like mine. "But you can't outrun yourself, Ezra." I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. "Who are you?" "You know who I am," he said. "You've been writing about me for weeks. I'm the pack leader." "That's impossible. I've only been out here 2 days." He smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp, too white. "Check your watch, Ezra. What day is it?" I looked down at my wrist. The date window showed September 28th. According to my journal, I'd started this assignment on September 15th. I'd lost nearly 2 weeks. "We've been having such good talks," the pack leader said. "You just don't remember them all yet. But you will. The memory comes back bit by bit, like healing from an injury. Speaking of which, how's your head feeling? Better?" Now that he mentioned it, my head did feel better. The constant dull ache I'd lived with since Vietnam was gone. The fog that sometimes clouded my thoughts had lifted. I felt clearer, sharper, more aware than I had in years. "I've been helping you heal," he explained. "Trading wolf medicine for human knowledge. You teach me about Park Service procedures, radio frequencies, patrol schedules. I teach you about hunting. The people who died were weak, soft, easy prey." His yellow eyes glowed brighter. "But you're different, Ezra. You're a predator who's been pretending to be prey. I'm just helping you remember what you really are." I wanted to pull the trigger, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that my head felt better than it had in years. Or maybe it was the small voice in the back of my mind that whispered he might be right. "What do you want?" I asked. "Partnership," he said. "There are 7 of us in the pack, but we need human intelligence to hunt efficiently. You know how people think, how they move, where they go to feel safe. Help us hunt, and we'll help you heal completely. No more blackouts, no more confusion, just perfect predatory clarity." The offer was tempting, more tempting than it should have been. "And if I refuse?" His smile widened. "Then you'll keep losing time. Keep finding bloody notes you don't remember writing. Keep waking up with human meat in your pack. Eventually, you'll lose yourself completely, but at least you'll remember every kill." The pack leader stood up, and for just a moment, his shape seemed to blur. Human form mixed with something else. Longer limbs, broader shoulders, a muzzle instead of a face. Then he was human again. "Think about it, Ezra. We'll talk again soon." He walked into the trees and vanished, leaving me alone with my rifle and the terrible knowledge that I was no longer entirely human. 3 days later, I killed my first person. I don't remember deciding to do it. I don't remember stalking him through the laurel thickets or waiting for the perfect moment, but I remember the kill itself with perfect, horrible clarity. His name was Marcus Webb, a geology student from the University of Tennessee who'd come to collect rock samples near Cataract Falls. 22 years old, sandy hair, wore thick glasses that made him look younger. I found his research notes scattered around his campsite after I killed him. I remember the feeling of my teeth tearing his throat open. I remember the hot blood on my hands and face. I remember the incredible surge of strength and satisfaction as he stopped struggling. But I also remember looking down at his body afterward and feeling sick with horror. because part of me, the human part that was still fighting, knew this was wrong. Murder. I was a park ranger. I was supposed to protect people like Marcus Webb, not hunt them down like animals. The pack leader found me crouched over the body, covered in blood and shaking. "Excellent work," he said, crouching beside me. "How do you feel?" "Sick," I whispered. "I killed him. I murdered a college kid. You hunted weak prey and fed your pack. Nothing sick about that." But there was no pack around us. Just me and him and Marcus Webb's torn body. I said as much. The pack leader laughed. "Look closer, Ezra. Really look." I looked up and saw them. 7 massive shapes moving through the trees like shadows. Wolves, but wrong. Too big, too smart, walking on hind legs when they thought I wasn't looking directly at them. Yellow, eyes gleaming in the afternoon light. "We've been hunting together for weeks," the pack leader explained. "You just haven't been able to see us clearly until now. The healing process affects perception, makes you more aware of things that were always there." One of the wolves, a huge black female with scars across her muzzle, padded over and began feeding on Marcus Webb's body. She looked at me and nodded, like she was thanking me for the meal. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt proud. That night, the pack leader showed me how to transform. "It wasn't magic," he explained. "It was just a matter of remembering what we really were underneath the human disguise." He had me lie down in a circle of stones while he chanted in a language that sounded like wolves howling. Then he used a sharp rock to carve symbols into my arms and chest. The pain was incredible, but as the blood flowed, I felt myself changing. My senses became razor sharp. I could smell individual animals from miles away, hear heartbeats through thick tree cover. My muscles grew stronger, my reflexes faster. My thoughts became clearer and more focused. For the first time in years, I felt completely healthy. "This is what you were meant to be," the pack leader said. "Before Vietnam, before the injury, before civilization taught you to be ashamed of your predatory nature." I spent the night running through the forest on all fours, hunting deer with the pack. We brought down a large buck near midnight, and I ate my share of raw meat while it was still warm. It tasted better than any meal I'd ever had. But when morning came, and I changed back to human form, the guilt returned. I was a murderer now, a cannibal. I'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The pack leader sensed my internal struggle. "Guilt is a human weakness," he told me as we prepared to hunt again. "You feel bad because you're still thinking like prey, but you're not prey anymore. Ezra, you're an apex predator. Start acting like one." Over the next few days, we killed 3 more people. A middle-aged couple from Florida who'd come to photograph autumn leaves. I remember luring them away from the main trail by telling them about a spectacular waterfall deeper in the backcountry. The pack surrounded them near Howling Creek, and we fed well that night. A solo hiker named David Chen, an accountant from Memphis who'd taken a week off work to find himself in the mountains. We stalked him for 2 days before striking. I remember the look of betrayal in his eyes when he realized his trusted park ranger was leading the attack. The kills were getting easier. Each time I transformed, more of my human conscience faded away. The pack leader was right. Guilt was just a weakness that held predators back from their true nature. But late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, I knew something was terribly wrong. I was supposed to be investigating the murders, not committing them. People were counting on me to stop the killing, not join it. I tried to radio for help, but something had happened to my equipment. Every frequency was dead except one, a channel that played the sounds of wolves howling. When I tried to call headquarters, my own voice came back to me, speaking words I hadn't said. "All clear. No problems. Investigation continuing." Someone was using my radio to report false updates to the Park Service. I checked my journal and found entries I didn't remember writing. Asterisk. Day 18. Killed another one today. Getting easier each time. Human thoughts feel fuzzy and distant now. Wolf thoughts much clearer. Asterisk asterisk. Day 21. Pack leader says final transformation almost complete. Few more hunts and won't need human form at all. Looking forward to it. Asterisk asterisk. Day 24. Remembered killing 7 campers before current assignment began. Bodies hidden throughout territory. Cover story about investigation was my idea. Very clever. Asterisk. That last entry stopped me cold. According to my own handwriting, I'd been killing people for months. The 7 dead campers that had triggered this investigation, I'd killed them myself. The Park Service hadn't sent me to stop the murders. I'd manipulated them into sending me out here so I could kill more people. But that was impossible. I'd been a park ranger for 16 years. I'd saved lives, not taken them. I'd dedicated my career to protecting these mountains and the people who visited them. Unless that was all a lie. The pack leader appeared beside me as I stared at my journal, trying to make sense of the timeline. "Memory's a funny thing," he said. "Especially damaged memory, so easy to reshape, to improve. I've been helping you remember who you really are, Ezra. Not the pretend hero you've been playing for 16 years, but the killer you've always been, deep down." "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Isn't it? Think about Vietnam, Ezra. Really think. What did you do over there?" "Vietnam." I tried to remember my service, but the memories were fuzzy, confused. I remembered being wounded, getting the head injury. But what had I been doing when the shrapnel hit? Slowly, horribly, the memory came back. I'd been in a village outside Da Nang, night patrol. We'd gotten reports of enemy activity, but when we arrived, we found only civilians. Families with children, old people, farmers. Our lieutenant had ordered us to search for weapons, but some of the soldiers had started doing other things. Terrible things. I should have stopped them. Should have reported them. Instead, I'd joined in. I remembered the feeling of power, the rush of taking what I wanted by force. I remembered killing people who couldn't fight back. I remembered enjoying it. The head injury hadn't happened during combat. It had happened when another soldier tried to stop me from murdering a child. I'd turned on him with my bayonet, and he'd hit me with the butt of his rifle. "You see," the pack leader said softly, "you've always been a predator, Ezra. The park ranger thing was just a disguise, a way to get close to potential victims while looking respectable. But now, you don't need the disguise anymore." I wanted to deny it, but the memories were too clear. Too real. The pack leader was right. I'd been a killer long before I met him. He'd just helped me stop pretending to be anything else. That night, we hunted together as a full pack for the first time. 7 wolves and 1 man who was becoming less human with each kill. We brought down a family of 4, parents and 2 teenagers, who'd been camping near Bear Creek. I felt no guilt this time, no hesitation. They were prey, and we were predators. It was the natural order of things. The pack leader watched me feed on the father's liver and smiled. "Almost ready," he said. "One more transformation, and you'll be pack leader material yourself. Ready to start your own territory." My own territory? There are other parks, Ezra, other rangers, other opportunities for hunting. You could spread this gift across the entire park system. Imagine dozens of ranger wolves protecting their territory from human interference. It was a beautiful vision, a world where predators ruled and prey knew their place, where the strong took what they wanted without apology or hesitation. I was ready to embrace it completely. But first, we had one more hunt to complete. The final hunt came when a family with young children entered our territory. The Hendersons, Tom and Sarah with their twin daughters, maybe 6 years old. They'd hiked in from the Eastern Trail, planning to spend 3 days camping near Cataract Falls. Perfect prey, isolated, vulnerable, trusting. The pack leader wanted me to prove my commitment by leading the hunt personally. "Show us you fully embraced your reef. Nature," he said as we tracked them to their campsite. "Kill the adults yourself. The children can feed the pack." I crouched in the brush, watching the family set up camp. Tom Henderson was teaching his daughters how to tie proper knots. Sarah was unpacking food and laughing at something one of the girls had said. They looked happy, safe, unaware that death was watching them from the tree line. For the first time in weeks, I hesitated. "What's wrong?" the pack leader whispered beside me. "Nothing," I said, just waiting for the right moment. But that wasn't true. Looking at those little girls, I felt something stirring deep inside me. A memory of who I used to be, or who I thought I used to be. The part of me that had chosen to become a park ranger, to protect people, not hunt them. "The children are afraid," one of the wolves said in my mind. I could hear them all now, their thoughts mixing with mine during hunts. "They sense us watching. Fear makes the meat tender. The pack was getting restless. 7 massive predators circling the campsite, waiting for my signal to attack. But I couldn't give it. Something was wrong. Not just with the situation, but with everything. The memories the pack leader had shown me, Vietnam, the murders, my true nature. They felt real, but they also felt foreign, like someone else's experiences grafted onto my mind. I thought about my real memories, the ones that felt authentically mine. 16 years of mountain rescue operations, pulling hikers out of ravines, treating snake bites, helping lost children find their parents. Those memories had weight, consistency, emotional truth. The Vietnam memories felt like a movie I'd seen but not lived. Now, Ezra, the pack leader hissed. Strike now while they're separated. Tom Henderson had wandered away from the campsite to gather firewood. Perfect time to take him down quietly. But instead of attacking, I found myself stepping into the clearing with my hands raised. Mr. Henderson, I called out. Park Ranger Ezra Holloway, I need to speak with you urgently. The pack leader snarled behind me, but I ignored him. Tom Henderson looked up from the wood he'd been collecting. Is there a problem, Ranger? Yes, sir. We've had reports of aggressive wildlife in this area. Large predators hunting in groups. I need to escort you and your family out immediately. Sarah Henderson emerged from their tent. What kind of predators? Wolves, I said, not taking my eyes off the tree line. I could see yellow eyes glowing in the shadows, hear growls of anger as the pack realized what I was doing. Unusually large and aggressive, they've killed several people in the past few weeks. The pack leader stepped into view then, still wearing his human disguise. Don't listen to him, he said calmly. Ranger Holloway has been suffering from head trauma, hallucinations, paranoid episodes. We've been looking for him for days. Tom Henderson looked confused. Who are you? Dr. William Marsh, psychiatric specialist with the Park Service. We've been tracking Ranger Holloway since he disappeared 3 weeks ago. He's been living in the wilderness, talking to imaginary wolves. It was a perfect cover story. Reasonable, believable, designed to make me look crazy if I tried to explain the truth. But I had one advantage the pack leader didn't know about. I'd been keeping a second journal, hidden in my boot. Real observations, written during brief moments of clarity when the wolf influence wasn't overwhelming my mind. Notes about the pack's behavior, their weaknesses, their fears. Sarah, I said urgently, get your daughters and start walking back toward the main trail. Don't run, but move fast. Now wait just a minute, Dr. Marsh said, moving closer. Ezra, you're having another episode. Why don't you sit down and let me help you? I pulled out my rifle and aimed it at his chest. Because you're not human. Tom Henderson stepped between us. Ranger, please, you're scaring my children. Good, I said. They should be scared. Mr. Henderson, that man isn't a doctor. He's something else. Something that's been manipulating my mind for weeks, making me think I'm a killer. The pack leader smiled sadly. Ezra, we've been through this. You killed 7 people before we found you. The evidence is overwhelming. But now I remembered the truth. The real timeline, not the false memories he'd implanted. I'd come out here to investigate murders, not commit them. The killer had been manipulating my mind from the first day, using my head injury against me, making me lose time and believe I'd done things I hadn't done. The bodies, I said. Where are the bodies of the people I supposedly killed? For just a moment, the pack leader hesitated. Hidden throughout the territory, as you well know. Then show them to me. Show the Hendersons. Prove I'm the killer. Another hesitation. Because he couldn't prove it. The bodies existed, but I hadn't killed them. The pack had been hunting humans long before I arrived, and they'd used my presence to cover their tracks. That's when the real wolves emerged from the forest. 7 massive creatures, walking upright like men, but clearly not human. Their yellow eyes gleamed with intelligence and hunger. Sarah Henderson screamed and grabbed her daughters. Run! I shouted. Back to the trail, don't stop. The family ran, and the pack leader dropped his human disguise. His body stretched and changed, becoming something between man and wolf. Larger than either, with claws like knives and teeth like broken glass. You could have been pack leader, he snarled. Could have ruled your own territory. Instead, you choose to die protecting prey. The pack circled me, 7 nightmares moving with inhuman speed. but I'd learned a few things during my weeks with them. I knew their weaknesses. I pulled a flare from my pack and fired it into the dry leaves at my feet. The forest floor erupted in flames, creating a ring of fire around me. Wolves fear fire above everything else, even supernatural wolves. They backed away, snarling. "Silver," I called out to the pack leader. "That's why you never let me see you transform completely. Silver hurts you." I pulled out my backup ammunition. Bullets I'd loaded with silver coins melted down and reformed. Just a theory based on old Cherokee legends, but worth testing. The pack leader laughed. "Silver is a myth, Ezra. We're not werewolves. We're something much older." He leaped through the flames straight at me. I shot him in the chest 3 times. The silver bullets hit like explosives. Each impact sent him flying backward, howling in agony. The other wolves scattered, whimpering like beaten dogs. But the pack leader wasn't dead. He lay on the burning ground, changing rapidly between human and wolf forms. His body couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. "This isn't over," he gasped. "You've only delayed the hunt. We'll find you, Ezra. We'll find your family, your friends, everyone you've ever cared about." I walked over and put the muzzle of my rifle against his forehead. "No," I said. "You won't." The 4th shot ended it. The remaining wolves howled once in unison, then vanished into the forest. I let them go. Without their leader, they were just animals again. Dangerous, but not the supernatural threat they'd been under his control. I stumbled after the Henderson family, following their trail back toward the main hiking path. The fire was spreading behind me, but it was contained to the hollow where we'd fought. It would burn itself out against the creek. I found the Hendersons a mile down the trail, huddled together and crying. When Tom Henderson saw me coming, he raised a hiking stick defensively. "It's okay," I said, raising my hands. "It's over. The threat is eliminated." "Those things," Sarah Henderson whispered. "What were they?" "Wolves," I said. "Very dangerous wolves. But they're gone now." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The truth was too complicated, too unbelievable. Better to let the official report list it as an aggressive wolf pack eliminated by ranger action. I escorted the family back to their car and radioed for backup. When the other rangers arrived, I told them I'd tracked down and eliminated a pack of rabid wolves that had been attacking campers. Case closed. But privately, I knew it wasn't really over. 3 months later, I resigned from the Park Service. The official reason was medical retirement due to complications from my Vietnam injury. The unofficial reason was that I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. The pack leader had been inside my head for weeks, rewriting memories, implanting false experiences. Even after his death, I sometimes caught myself thinking thoughts that didn't feel like mine, remembering things that might not have happened. The psychiatric evaluation was inconclusive. They found evidence of severe mental stress and possible hallucinations, but my story was consistent, and the physical evidence supported most of my claims. 7 dead wolves, all unusually large. Claw marks on trees. Human remains in their den. What they couldn't explain was the supernatural elements, so they quietly left those out of the final report. Dr. Patricia Weston, the psychiatrist assigned to my case, was more direct. "Ezra," she said during our last session, "I believe something traumatic happened to you in those mountains. But the human mind sometimes creates elaborate fantasies to cope with events too terrible to accept as reality. Shape-shifting wolves, mind control, false memories. These could be your brain's way of processing a more mundane but equally horrifying experience." She was probably right. Maybe there had been no supernatural pack leader. Maybe just a clever human killer who'd driven me temporarily insane, made me think I was losing time and memory. Maybe the wolf forms had been hallucinations brought on by stress and head trauma. It would certainly be easier to believe that version. But 2 weeks after my retirement, I got a phone call from a ranger in Yellowstone. "Ezra, this is Mike Brennan, up in Wyoming. I heard you dealt with some unusual wolf activity down in Tennessee." "Something like that," I said. "We've got a situation up here. 7 hikers killed in the past month, bodies found in impossible locations. And there's a new ranger on staff, transferred in from another park. Guy named William Marsh. Claims he knew you." My blood went cold. "Tall guy, pale eyes, speaks very softly?" "That's him." "Ezra, there's something wrong with this guy. He knows things he shouldn't know, goes places no human could reach. And since he arrived, the wildlife has been acting strange. Aggressive, organized. I hung up the phone and started packing. It wasn't over after all. Maybe it never would be. The pack leader had told the truth about one thing. They weren't werewolves or any other kind of creature from human folklore. They were something older, something that had learned to take human form to hunt more efficiently. And when one pack leader died, another took his place. I drove to Wyoming that night, my rifle loaded with silver bullets and my mind clear about what I had to do. The Park Service might not need me anymore, but other people did. People who didn't know they were being hunted by something that wore human faces during the day and wolf forms at night. People who wouldn't survive without someone to protect them. I'd been a ranger for 16 years, and I'd always taken pride in one simple principle: protect the mountains and the people who visit them. That hadn't changed just because I'd retired. The hunt was starting again in new territory, with a new pack leader who'd learned from the mistakes of the last one. But he'd also inherited the same weaknesses, the same vulnerabilities. And this time, I'd be ready for him. I reached Yellowstone just after dawn, driving through forests that felt too quiet, too empty. In the distance, I could hear wolves howling, but they sounded too intelligent, too organized, too human. My name is Ezra Holloway, and I hunt the things that hunt people. The war in the mountains never really ends. It just moves from battlefield to battlefield, predator to predator, ranger to ranger. But someone has to fight it. Someone has to stand between the monsters and the innocent families who just want to see a waterfall or sleep under the stars. I parked my truck at the ranger station and checked my rifle one more time. Then I walked into the forest to find William Marsh and end this hunt once and for all. Or die trying. The mountains were waiting,